Hello, and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Malik.
Malik!
Thank you, Hyle. Thank you.
Oh, so good to have you back on the show. Welcome to the Kongversation Season 12.
My God, has it really been 12 years?
Yeah, unfortunately it has. And, since the 12 years since we kicked off the Kongversation, nostalgia has been the backbone of the podcast. We launched in early 2013, back when all of the games that we at the show, at DK Vine at the time, all the games that we loved and grew up with were from the 1990s and the early 2000s. And we were just past the decade mark for the rare buyout. But what had given DK Vine as like an institute, as a more than just this relic from the late 1990s, from like the early internet, what allowed us to really shake off the dust and enter the 2010s with renewed confidence and swagger was the launch in 2010 of Retro Studios' Donkey Kong Country Returns. I mean, that was what realigned us. That's what brought us back, and that's what set me on the trajectory that I'm on now, where DK Vine is my full-time job. None of that would have happened had we not gotten Donkey Kong Country Returns, this resurrection. So it was more than just nostalgia that was fueling us. It reignited the fandom, and it made Donkey Kong, and by extension, the DKU and Rare's legacy, feel much more of the present day than it had in quite a long time.
Well put.
Later in 2013, Nintendo would announce the sequel, which would be coming for the Wii U, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. And that game became the primary topic of discussion in the early days of this podcast. And it really did sort of lay the groundwork for everything that was to follow in the 12 years after that. So, what do you do when the sequel to the game that brought us back to the table turns 10 years old itself and is still the most recent new standalone Donkey Kong game?
I don't know.
That depressing thought, as well as celebrating what we do have with Tropical Freeze, is the topic of today's conversation. Oh boy.
I'm excited.
This isn't going to be a downer, Malik. This is going to be a reason to, as they say, count our blessings and appreciate what we do have and what we are gifted with Tropical Freeze, which is still one of my favorite games of all time. I say still, like, there's a lot of like new contenders. Like, a couple games after Tropical Freeze made their way on the list, but I have kind of a limited pool to draw from, but it is still pretty high up there.
Yeah, same with me. And my what was the word you just said? Limited pool. My pool is less limited than yours, but Tropical Freeze is still high up there. It's one of my all-time favorites.
So we'll be getting into all of that, but really quick, I want to plug a couple of things. As I said on the last episode, we have a giveaway going on right now on our Blue Sky social media account. It's the Eyes of March Blue Sky giveaway, where if you follow us on Blue Sky, the new Twitter alternative that's now open to the public, and you repost the social media post about this contest, you will be entered to win a raffle. We're drawing 2 names to win a set of Fangamer's retired Banjo-Kazooie Googly Eye pins. That's right. The official Banjo-Kazooie product rare googly eyes that you can pin on anything. I hoarded 2 of them before they discontinued them. I think I got like 2 of the last ones they had in stock. And I was like, I'm going to give these away for social media. And then social media sort of became a dumpster fire. And then I was like, well, I'll wait until there's a good alternative to give these away. And I think we have it now with Blue Sky. There's still some kinks to work out. And obviously people need to come over, which is why we're doing this contest. But yeah, go to dkvine.com/Blue Sky or just search for us on Blue Sky and make sure to follow us and repost this, and you will be entered to win. We'll draw the 2 winners at the end of March. Also, DK Vine is on TeePublic. We have our merchandise store on TeePublic, dkvine.com/merchandise, or searching us on TeePublic. I've plugged a few things in this new season that we've added since the end of last year, but I don't think I've plugged the current baby range of products we've got on the shop right now. So, Malik, do you know the story of Current Baby?
No.
Okay. All right. Let me explain. So there was this unlicensed, unofficial magazine around the time the Super Mario Brothers movie launching last year. And it was put out by some magazine publishing house, and it was just like everything about Mario, Super Mario, everything you need to know about the new movie, all the characters, the history, unlicensed, not even published by a usual video game publisher, I think. So anyway, they have all of this stuff in there, and some of it's wildly inaccurate. They have a section for characters in Mario and like Mario sports games, Mario Kart, etc. And there's a section called Current Babies. Current Babies. And
Current baby.
So we've got like Bowser Jr., I think maybe the like baby versions of some of the characters. I don't know if they were actually included, but anyway, right there underneath Current Babies was Diddy Kong.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
So.
I think I did see this bit.
You saw this bit, yeah. So here, let me pull up the little excerpt I clipped from the magazine when I shared it on social media. So it says, Diddy Kong, the nephew of the big gorilla, goes way back to the Donkey Kong 2 arcade game, released in 1982. But Diddy was first named in 1994's Donkey Kong Country.
I do remember seeing that.
Yeah. So, Current Baby kind of became a little inside joke, a little meme in our circles for the rest of the year. And then at the beginning of 2024, in accordance with Baby New Year and all that, I was like, we're going to put a Current Baby shirt on TeePublic. And it's not just a shirt, though. You can also get it in a tank top, a la our favorite Current Baby, Diddy Kong. And you can get it in a baby onesie for your actual current baby. Should you have one. Yeah. So...
All I can do is laugh.
Yeah, if you would like to wear a shirt that labels you as a current baby, just like our favorite character Diddy Kong, then head to dkvine.com/merchandise. Finally, be sure to subscribe to DK Vine on YouTube. We've got some new videos headed your way really soon, including a new video on Tropical Freeze. And Malik, you are the cartoon gamer on YouTube, are you not?
I think so. I might be one of the first.
So, should you happen to find yourself on YouTube and you also want to follow someone else, maybe give the cartoon gamer a little follow as well, especially seeing as how you have a new video on Donkey Kong Jungle Beat.
Yeah, it was a video that was a long time coming, but I'm finally glad I put it out, and It was a lot of fun. What did you think of it, Hyle?
I liked it. I liked it. I left a little
Yeah.
comment in the comments.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, I know you replied to it.
I said, what did you think? But I already knew, but you know.
Yeah. No, Jungle Beat, of course, has a weird place in the annals of our fandom of Donkey Kong history. And a lot of us have come around on it, of course, since the controversy mostly made up upon its release. But yeah, it's a game that I've really warmed up to. I find it a lot of fun. And I think you did a good job of stressing how weird it is at the same time, while not holding that against it, which is important.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you think so. Yeah.
So yeah,
everyone give that a watch.
Absolutely. And really quick, we do stream these episodes of the Kongversation as we record them for our $5 and up patrons, warts and all. You hear the ugly process of how a Kongversation episode gets made. And I just want to give a shout out right now to our live stream. March Rose, hello. I will be checking in as we record, trying to get everybody's thoughts in as we go. All right. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, Malik. It was released for the Wii U in Japan on February 13th, 2014. And it came out in the West a week later on February 21st, which is interesting that it wasn't the, international same day of... we are still in an era where you had slight variations in the release dates. So, we hadn't fully gotten there yet. So, yeah, Japan got it a week early. And I remember trying to avoid spoilers because it was
Same.
already, completely out there. People beat it the first night, before morning had even dawned here in the U.S. The day it came out. And so, the whole game is out there if you wanted to see it, or, if you wanted to spoil it for somebody else. So it was a fraught week trying to dodge everything.
Yeah, I got spoiled on Sticker Brush Symphony being in the game, and I was like, okay, I don't want to see any more.
Yeah. Brazil got it a month after on March 20th. And so let's just say we've timed this episode for our listeners in Brazil.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's say that then.
Hola, meus amigos. My Portuguese isn't that great. I tried. Why aren't we doing a spotlight episode for Tropical Freeze? Because despite it now being as old as Grab by the Ghoulies was in 2013 when we started the podcast, I don't feel like the time is right to try and make a definitive statement on Tropical Freeze, mostly because we haven't yet seen how it's going to influence future Donkey Kong titles. So, by definition, it's still basically the incumbent Donkey Kong game. And, it's pretty clear the DK series is not going to be substantially reinvented with the next game, and that plenty of influences of the Retro Studio games will remain, mostly because of necessity, because they had to have this baseline for things like the theme park. And so, you just kind of have to default to them. So this Nintendo pattern of, well, it's a new team, let's do our own thing. I don't think it's going to be quite as severe going forward as it was going from Rare to Nintendo EAD with Jungle Beat and Nintendo EAD to Retro with Returns. I think there's going to be a more consistent carryover of elements of iconography, of visual identity. And that's mostly because they've already invested so much in the theme park. So, I think the effective limbo the series has been in since, with Tropical Freeze having a second launch of sorts in 2018 on the Switch, means it's been our ever-present past for a decade. It's now a decade old, but it doesn't feel like it's been a decade old because it keeps getting either brought back or defaulted to as the most current reference point for Donkey Kong.
Yeah, I would say so too. Yeah.
So, I feel like we'll do a spotlight when we can safely say this is its place in the canon, right? We haven't even done a spotlight on Returns yet, so come on now, just give us a break, We'll get to it eventually. So this isn't going to be like everything about Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, like a 3-parter analysis of the history of every world, of every level. But I did want to acknowledge the 10th anniversary of the game on the show, given the impact it had and is still having. And, also mention the psychic turmoil it's causing the fandom to reach this milestone and not have a new standalone game yet. I realize people are sort of clawing their eyes out. People are starting to lose hope a little bit, despite everything that's good around Donkey Kong in the present day. It's this weird dichotomy, Malik, of people despairing. And then meanwhile, Universal Studios, they're rolling out these theme parks in Japan and the United States. And it's just like the Donkey Kong is everywhere and he's nowhere. He's Schrodinger's ape. He's just, and you're either really optimistic or you're incredibly nihilistic. The pessimism has just overtaken your soul. And I can understand those viewpoints. We're going to try to get to the root of it. We're going to try to make everyone feel good. But mostly I want to just celebrate the game itself, because I think it's worthy of celebrating no matter how old it is. So
definitely.
And Malik, you are here because I really wanted your perspective, because I don't know if we've really just sat down and chatted about this game. Without any caveats, without any other topic sort of presiding over it. So I just really want to hear what you have to say. So that's why you're here. All right, but
yeah, where should I start?
Well, let's start at the beginning, or at least the beginning to the outsider's perspective. E3 2013. That was where Tropical Freeze was announced. They did by that point, they had already moved to the Nintendo Direct style for their E3 presentations. So while Donkey Kong Country Returns got announced by Reggie on stage in Los Angeles, and, you had the iconic moment of, if you listen, you can hear it coming. This was more just, the Nintendo Direct. Iwata was still alive and still, sort of presiding over them. Mm-hmm. So the way they introduced Tropical Freeze is it was just a cold, hard cut to the image of the plane dropping down in Mangrove Cove, the first stage of the level. And, I don't know what I'm looking at. It's just this craft drops down. I thought it was a spaceship at first. Because I
thought it was like Pikmin.
Yeah, I was so kind of like half asleep for this. This was one E3 where I was just not fully cognizant. I don't know what was happening with me, but yeah, I wasn't expecting anything. So I see what I think is a spaceship dropping down. Being as Nintendo, I think maybe Pikmin had kind of incepted the idea into my brain, and then out of the hatch pops Donkey Kong. And I'm just like, what?
What is this? Are you kidding me?
I mentioned before and discussed quite a bit how I have something akin to trailer blindness, where I can't actually process what I'm seeing when I'm seeing a trailer for something that I'm going to be really hyped for the very first time. Like, I'm not picking up on details. I'm only getting just kind of the blunt overview, but the adrenaline and the sheer enthusiasm and giddiness is kind of outweighing all of my usual analytical skills. And so I'm making a lot of misconceptions when I see it at first. And like when Returns was announced, I could have sworn I saw kremlings in the trailer. I was convinced I saw kremlings, and they were really the frogoons, the inflatable frog baddies in Returns.
Yeah.
But I was just, my brain saw kremlings, and that's what I thought they were. So I thought this was a spaceship, and I was like, Donkey Kong's in space? Which
again?
well, yes, because Donkey Kong's been in space in Jungle Beat, in Jungle Climber, a little bit in Barrel Blast. Of course, Diddy Kong went in space even before him, but
yeah,
we've come to find out Donkey Kong in space was at the very least bandied about for a day or two at Retro before they went in the direction they did. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, I didn't gather this was an airplane. I just thought Donkey Kong is on an alien planet, and then the imagery after that didn't really help because he was bouncing on the giant jelly cubes in Juicy Jungle, and so at that point, like that's the second image that was burned in my brain after what I thought was a spaceship, and I was just like, This feels kind of like Jungle Beat. Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
Well, by that point, I'd come around on Jungle Beat, right? But
yeah,
that being said, I didn't necessarily want them fully embracing any Jungle Beat aesthetics yet. You know, like I was like, you know, give me something a little bit more traditional before we bring back giant gelatin pools for Donkey Kong to swim in the sky. But yeah, so I was like, oh, okay, that's weird. And then the third image that stuck out in my brain was in the clip of Grassland Groove when Donkey Kong reaches Professor Chops. Of course, we didn't even know his name was Professor Chops yet because they didn't name him in Donkey Kong Country Returns. So he was just called Tutorial Pig, and we gave him the fanon nickname Checkpoint.
I kind of hate that name.
Checkpoint?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's okay because it's not actually his real name. It's Professor Chops.
Yeah.
But
which is why I'm saying I hate it.
So, like, I knew him internally as Checkpoint. And when Donkey, because I wasn't even really gathering that this was a sequel to Donkey Kong Country Returns, like Donkey Kong Country Returns 2, even though, yes, of course it is. Stylistically, of course it is. But
yeah,
because I'm in this stupor of not expecting a Donkey Kong Country game, I'm not even sure what I'm seeing. I didn't know. So seeing Tutorial Pig / Checkpoint / Professor Chops, it was weirdly reassuring because it grounded me. It grounded my brain. I was like, okay, wait, this is a Donkey Kong Country Returns sequel because there's the pig. And it's weird because Professor Chops, you love him or you hate him.
I like him, yeah.
I both love him and I both hate him. Because there's the one render of him where he's got that kind of DreamWorks style, like arched eyebrow. And he looks like the smuggest little twerp you've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I think that's colored a lot of people's impressions of him. And plus, ringing the bell incessantly in Returns whenever you died 5 times in a level, which was very easy to do. So he just became sort of an irritant and sort of a, like, oh, he's a new era Donkey Kong Country character. He sucks compared to Swanky Kong or Brash Bear or whatever. Professor Chops, ew. I like Professor Chops, and I think he could grow on me if he appeared in more things. Like, just seeing him on the reusable toe peg being sold right now at Super Nintendo World in Japan, I'm just like, oh my god, Professor Chops is on the toe bag.
Professor Chops, oh my god.
He's kind of reassuring whenever you see him. It's just he left a poor first impression, especially not even having a name, which if there's one thing about Donkey Kong Country fans is we obsess over characters first and foremost. So if you don't even bother naming your character, that's strike one and strike two and strike three.
I was about to say, it's more than strike one. Thank you.
They did rectify it with this game. They gave him a name. They rectified a lot with this game, I have to say. We'll touch upon that as well. But yeah, see, Professor Chops was like, okay, I know what this is now. And hey, Professor Chops is back. Cool. And fourth image that stuck out in my brain was they very clearly wanted to express that you could swim in this game, that there would be underwater portions and levels and underwater stages in their entirety. And that was a big deal at the time because not having any water stages in Donkey Kong Country Returns was a point of controversy in 2010. It's like, how can you have a Donkey Kong Country game and not have a water stage?
Yeah, I know, right? What the heck?
Which is, it's funny because I don't know if anybody really considers the water levels to be their favorite in any Donkey Kong Country game. Yeah, obviously there's the music, which everyone really loves, and I think it's the music, like aquatic ambience, especially.
Yeah, I think that's what sways people.
It elevates them into being something more than just underwater levels. Because, personally speaking, any underwater stage in any 2D platformer, they're not going to be my favorite. But the Donkey Kong Country games always sold them on how atmospheric they were and immersive. And so they became more than just, a water level, have to get through this. And you ran into that occasionally, but I think everybody appreciated them because of that transcendent sort of feeling you got when you played them.
I think so too. Yeah, that's definitely it. Except for Poison Pond, that sucks.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's supposed to suck. That's my answer to that critique. It's like, yeah, you're not supposed to like Poison Pond. It's a polluted lake. You're supposed to feel bad.
Can you imagine if you had fun in this level?
What would that say about you filthy polluter?
Probably say a lot.
So at this point, I'm like, okay, they have water levels, but this is when the devil on my shoulder started whispering into my ear, Malik, because so far it looks good. So far, just happy to have a new Donkey Kong game. But that little petty part of my subconscious was starting to come out and say, looks like there's no kremlings. Looks like they didn't bring the kremlings back again. And yeah, at this point,
frogs.
at this point in 2013, this is when you started to get the earliest embers of the bring back K. Rool movement. Like you wanted K. Rool back. Like not having him in Returns, people, especially, longtime fans, I should say, didn't like it at the time. But to not have him in the sequel felt like, well, you're just never going to use him again. And with Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and Wii U on the horizon, it started this movement that ultimately, no pun intended, did bring back K. Rool. But we hadn't quite reached that fervor yet. I think that wouldn't come until a year later when, Super Smash Bros. 4 hype was really in full swing. But you started to get it here, and it was just like, okay, they haven't brought back the kremlings. I don't like that. And so that's when I was just like, the initial buzz I was feeling was a little bit muted at that point. But then, Iwata came over with his narration, and we preserved this on our YouTube channel, by the way. That this whole opening narration by Satoru Iwata, like introducing Tropical Freeze to the world, and I've quoted him a couple times in our show notes here because I think he did a really good job of introducing us to the Snowmads, the enemy force in this game. So what Iwata said was, in this new adventure, Donkey Kong and his friend's home, Donkey Kong Island, has been overrun by Vikings from the North Seas. In order to take back his home, Donkey Kong needs to set off on an adventure to 5 other islands. And so, I love that world building, by the way. Vikings from the North Seas. It just conjures up so much imagery in that simple statement. And during the trailer, they also just showed us renders of the Snowmads against white backgrounds. It's just like, here they are. And we saw like various, walruses and penguins, i.e. tucks, in their stereotypical Viking garb. We didn't know them as the Snowmads for a while. For the earliest part of this game's hype cycle, we just referred to them as the Vikings. But I think they did a good job of immediately laying it out on the table for us and saying, here are the enemies of this game. It's not the Tiki Tac tribe, but they are themed as Vikings. Here's what they look like. Here's what they've done. And here's what you'll have to do to defeat them. And people were pretty instantaneously won over by them, I would say. Obviously, you did have holdouts in the fandom, because anything but the kremlings would have just been met with disappointment for them. But I remember thinking, okay, well, they're not the kremlings, but I'm open to this. This seems pretty original and pretty clever and pretty tonally on brand for Donkey Kong, I would have to say. How do you feel about the Snowmads, Malik?
So when I saw the trailer, because this is interesting, because the trailer that I saw was there was a bit of a delay with Iwata's narration. So when he was saying things, they didn't show up until a few seconds later. So when I heard Iwata say Vikings, they didn't show the Vikings just yet. And I was like, Vikings? What could those look like? And I saw them and I loved them immediately. I thought they looked super goofy. And I was like, oh man, this is so great. We're getting Donkey Kong has a rogues gallery of villains, and these are looking really, no pun intended, but cool. And yeah, I thought it was great seeing them the first time, and I love the Snowmads.
Yeah, so I like the Snowmads, and I think they are a very interesting villain faction. What I do like about them, it's clear to me, and I don't know if this has ever been confirmed, but I think it's pretty obviously transparent. Retro studied the kremlings. When they broke down who the enemies were going to be and they settled on Vikings, like Arctic animals. I really feel like Retro studied what the fans liked about the kremlings and tried to kind of reverse engineer it to fit their interpretation of Donkey Kong Country, their presentation, and apply it to an original group of baddies. They clearly wanted something that would resonate with the purist a bit more than the Tiki Tac tribe maybe did. And I think they were successful. Now, the Snowmads are probably a little bit more limited in what you can do with them after Tropical Freeze, given that they have a very specific theme. And, in the past, the kremlings would have just adopted the Viking theme for a game. K. Rool is now, a Viking, and here come the Viking kremlings. We had Kasha in Donkey Kong 64. Think of that, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so, it would have just been a one and done, or maybe one and then a Game Boy game and then done. And then K. Rool and the kremlings would have moved on to something else. Having a whole enemy faction themed around cold regions and being Vikings and freezing, I don't mind Donkey Kong having a big rogues gallery. I do actually really enjoy, and it's something I wanted back in the 1990s. I remember thinking, I would be okay if they gave the Kremlings a break for this one. You know, they're doing the Kremlings again? That's a bit disappointing. I would have liked to have seen them do something else. Because...
Monkey's paw.
Well, you have to keep in mind, too, we were getting not just annual Donkey Kong games back then. We were getting at least 2 a year for the initial, like, stages of Donkey Kong Country Mania, right? Like, we had an embarrassment of riches and we didn't realize it, or I didn't realize it at the time. I just thought this was going to be the norm. You know, we're just going to have annual games. It's just going to be the way it is. Like, nothing will ever change with game development or the circumstances behind who's making the series. This is great. This is great. My future is secure. I'm going to be doing this until I die. So, like, I did want Donkey Kong to have, like, a big Batman-esque stable of villains that you could draw from. Like, okay, yeah, K. Rool's the villain in this game, and then in the next game, it's Dr. Zebraface. You know, just going back and forth, and then you always have room for new ones, and then maybe they could team up in a game. I thought that would be really fun, but that was all on the condition that we would have a stable output of Donkey Kong games, you know?
Yeah.
I do think if we got some new a new Donkey Kong game every year, and then a new mainline Donkey Kong game every couple of years, like I'm talking about like maybe annual releases on the par of a King of Swing or a Jungle Climber or a racing game, and then you have your big Donkey Kong adventure, and then, you know, I think rotating out villains would be received a lot more warmly. No Snowmad pun intended there. But
sure,
despite their like limited ability to come back in the future, like we can even see this in the theme park, right? Like the Snowmads don't factor into it. It's the Tiki Tac tribe that are represented because, well, Snowmads represent freezing and cold, and that's not really on brand if you're just doing a sort of pure Donkey Kong aesthetic. But I do think the Snowmads are very effective in this game, and they make for a very memorable faction, and I do like them quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say, and this is one little criticism, I think Lord Frederick is a bit weak as the Snowmad head honcho.
I think so too, and for me, it's just because I feel there's an overabundance of walruses in the Snowmad lineup. If he was like a moose or something, maybe?
Well, I was thinking, what if he was a Yeti?
I like that. That's a cool idea.
And that could give you a reason why they want to effectively, forcibly colonize Donkey Kong Island is, well, he's a Yeti. He's a snow ape, you know, like... He wants the ape island, but he wants it to fit his conditions. Sort of this Himalayan like remodel of Donkey Kong Island.
Yeah, what if he looked like Donkey Kong?
Oh, he could just be Super Kong. He could just be Super Kong from Returns.
It's Super Kong.
Super Kong was just Lord Frederick incognito. Incognito.
Incognito.
Yeah. He was like taking notes. He was analyzing a situation. He was like, all right, this is what I'm going to do in a couple of years. I'm going to come back.
I have the power.
Yeah. Yeah, that would have been amazing. But yeah, you're right. I don't like that he's a walrus. I don't like that they kept him in silhouette as some, like, mystery. And then you see him, and he just looks like he does in silhouette, but with a mustache.
Yeah. Oh, so walrus. Cool.
Yeah.
Like, we haven't seen that, like, 50 million times.
Like, introducing him in silhouette, you're like, all right, what's his deal? Is it... People thought he was going to be K. Rool, like, in disguise.
Mm-hmm.
He was just a walrus, and it's like, okay.
It's like, okay, cool. Whatever.
And that would be one thing. We're just talking about design, right? But he's essentially, now that's what I call K. Rool. He's like a compilation of all of K. Rool's attack patterns from the Donkey Kong Country trilogy, a greatest hits.
I liked that at the time, because I figured that was the best we were going to get for quite some time. But yeah, it doesn't make him stand out on his own as a character. We when I saw him, I was just like, dude, he's just K. Rool. Which was cool, but again, he kind of lives in the shadow.
And it's a fun boss fight, but all of K. Rool's boss fights in the Donkey Kong Country trilogy were fun. And this is kind of just them all smooshed together. Tiki Tong may have just been a big head and hands and received a lot of criticism at the time. But at least he felt unique in the context of the greater series, where Lord Frederick, for as creative as the Snowmads are, Lord Frederick just kind of feels like an afterthought, and it's kind of a disappointing final boss. Even though it's a very fun final boss fight, I'm still left feeling a little bit unsatisfied with Lord Frederick. He could have been like the another thing we bandied about back closer to Tropical Freeze's releases. What if it was like this operatic, opera singer, this Wagner-esque, the fat lady has sung kind of ending to the game, or something along those lines. But yeah, I mean, I do like the Snowmads, but I would be okay if Lord Frederick didn't come back, if they ever bring back any of the Snowmads.
Yeah, me too. He's had his time in the sun.
Yeah, and he doesn't like the sun very much because it's warm.
And now it's time for him to melt.
Yeah. So after I'm like, okay, I'm on board with Vikings. God, we're still talking about the trailer, technically, Malik.
Yeah.
The next thing Iwata sold to us was, this is the first Donkey Kong Country game in HD, which is weird to think about.
Yeah.
Like, wait, really? But yeah, it was. The time frame, everything was still making the transition to HD from the late 2000s, the late aughts, to the early to mid 2010s. And they showed these dynamic camera angles in the game where, like, barrel blasting, like, all of a sudden the camera would now, like, pivot and kind of in this, like, 3D-esque illusionary effect. And I was like, whoa, this is really cool. This is exactly what I imagined modern Donkey Kong Country games would be, like, way back in the mid-90s. I was like, this is amazing. And, unfortunately, everything they showed in the trailer was basically the extent of it in the game.
Yeah. But it was cool.
Yeah, it didn't really factor into the game all that much. Like, you had some, like, rocket barrel stages that shifted perspective a little bit, minecart stages. They did a little bit with it, but I feel like this is one area of Tropical Freeze that I really would have liked to see a little bit more of. And, you've got to be careful. You've got to, like, make sure that the player still has control and you're not just turning it into one of the, like, cinematic games where it's all style over substance. But I never got that with these sequences in Tropical Freeze. It always felt like a natural part of the platform. And the only time it really felt like purely for show was that bit in the first minecart stage where they reach the end of the track and then a minecart drops and they fall down beneath, and you have that cutscene of them like, ah!
I loved that.
I do.
Oh,
I really do like
good.
that, yeah. But that's the only part where you don't really have control, where it's just purely for the splash, the thrill of it. But I do like it.
Yeah. I want them to do that at the Universal Park.
Well, it sounds like there is going to be some element of that where you feel like you're falling. Since, the whole gimmick of the roller coaster is you are attached to a hidden track underneath, and it's just creating the sense that you're, on this runaway minecart. But so at this point, I'm still feeling pretty good about this, but I'm like, it's basically Donkey Kong Country Returns 2, which I'll take. But I really would have liked one or two returning elements from the original games to really just satiate my hungry fan heart. And then we got it. Malik, because there she was. Dixie Kong just wafting down in this cliffside forested region. And there was a bit of a delay where you saw Dixie Kong and you're like, Dixie? And then Iwata says, in addition to Diddy Kong, Dixie Kong is back. as a playable character. And then I was good. I didn't need anything else. Dixie Kong was back as a playable character. That was enough for me. I was just like, I'll take it. And then I just run away all happy. You know, like I didn't need anything else. Getting Dixie back, I don't think people appreciate or value what that felt like in 2013 compared to where we are in 2024.
Yeah, I don't think they do. It's like when I saw the trailer, you said there was a bit of a delay for you, but for my thing, when Iwata said Dixie Kong was back, she hadn't even appeared on screen yet. So I was like, Dixie, where's Dixie? And then Dixie showed up. So, there she is.
Yeah. Because when Donkey Kong Country Returns came out, I do remember a lot of fandom discussion where, we'll never see Dixie Kong again. You know, people fly off the handle, and they go from 0 to 10 with very little push. You know, like,
yep.
And this is kind of the way it is for general Nintendo fandom as well. Like, whatever comes out, all of a sudden, that is the forever permanent status quo. In their minds, right?
Definitely.
Like, this is the way it's going to be. Well, then this is the way it's going to be forevermore. And so we got a new Donkey Kong Country game. Dixie Kong wasn't in it. Therefore, Dixie Kong is forever retired. Hang her up in the rafters above the stadium. She's done.
Going in the loft back behind the Christmas decorations.
Like, the argument I heard in 2010 was, well, they've relegated Diddy to basically be a secondary function of Donkey Kong, like a power-up. And that's not true if you're playing two-player, you know, but that's the way a lot of people thought of it. And so if that's all Diddy's good for, how is there going to be room for Dixie Kong? Not factoring in, well, then you could give Donkey Kong other power-ups in the form of other Kongs, and they could perform different functions than Diddy with a jetpack. Like the jetpack too, Diddy having the jetpack was another thing. Like, well, you don't need Dixie Kong now because Diddy has the jetpack. Like, that's what Dixie Kong does. That's her thing, is floating through the air. And if Diddy Kong can float through the air, there's no room for Dixie Kong. But again, it's like, well, Diddy Kong can do that, but Dixie Kong can just do it better. Yeah. So, I think we're so used to the idea of Dixie Kong being back thanks to Tropical Freeze that people forget how it felt like she was just this marginalized aspect of the series. Like, very, very, very important for the fans, but we never really knew if Nintendo felt the same way. Because the first thing against her was she wasn't in the original Donkey Kong Country. And because of that, she loses a couple of the iconic points because she isn't in the game that everyone knows and everyone played in some form or fashion. And even though Donkey Kong Country 2 is held in higher esteem by a lot of fans, that's the fandom perspective. That's inside the bubble. So getting Dixie Kong back, especially after she hadn't been in Donkey Kong 64, you know, she made a couple of sporadic appearances throughout the buyout era, but never to the degree that Diddy did. And so you haven't had this, you know, going back into the Rare era where, they're not really using Dixie. That's a shame. And yeah, I like Tiny Kong. I do. I like Lanky and Chunky as well, but Dixie she's right up there with Diddy as my favorite character. Like, sometimes she might even eke out Diddy as my favorite character, depending on how I feel. I'm always gonna, like, default to Diddy, but Dixie is my number 2. Very, very close to number 1. And I didn't like how she was kind of pushed aside in that era. So, to get her back in the 5th Donkey Kong Country game, what a huge victory that was for her fans. Oh my goodness. Yeah, and just, I mean, she's just so much fun to play as too. Like, going even beyond how much I love her character. She is just like people are like, oh, she's easy mode. Oh, she just takes out the challenge. She really doesn't though. It's just a lot of fun to have that like hair waft and to have that extra little bit of reach. It's just very satisfying. It has this gratifying feel to it that I don't think Diddy or Cranky have in the game.
Yeah, they got nothing on Dixie. I'm okay with saying she's the best character.
Yeah, sure. And also, the thrill of seeing her paired with Donkey Kong, I think that's also been lost a little bit in the decade since. Where we were used to seeing Dixie paired with Diddy or Kitty. To have her teamed up with Donkey Kong, we never had that before.
No, I always go back to that old DKC2 render of Diddy, Dixie, and DK hugging each other. And I'm like, oh my goodness, the prophecy has been fulfilled. They're in a game together.
So you can critique the whole way Retro does utilize the Kongs and how if you're playing single player, you're forced to play as Donkey Kong, at least before new funky mode or, hard mode. But just having Dixie teamed up with Donkey Kong, that was such a cool thing back then. And we're used to it now, but I don't think we should ever get so used to it that we stop appreciating it.
Yeah. Don't get too comfortable.
Yeah. So at that point, I'm completely sold. I'm over the punched moon, And
yeah.
and then Iwata announces that the title is Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, available November, which would not be the case. It was ultimately delayed until February, but at that time it was like, oh my god, it is a Donkey Kong Country game. Like, they retained the branding in the West. And like, shamefully, I didn't really get the Tropical Freeze pun until later in the day.
I didn't even see the tropical on the logo the first time. I just saw Donkey Kong Country Freeze. It's like, freeze! Yeah, my brother, when he was there, he's like, it's called Freeze?
You do you have your reaction video on YouTube?
That was one of the first reactions I ever did. Like E3 2013 Nintendo Direct. So if you really want to go back and hear me, I wouldn't recommend it, but it's there.
I think I've seen it before.
Yeah, you can hear our pure reactions. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't get that it was a play on Tropical Breeze at first, because Tropical Breeze is also not a phrase I think of much. So
no.
And I was still kind of like bewildered by everything. There's just a lot to process as someone who obsesses over every minute detail of Donkey Kong and the Donkey Kong universe. So the play on words in the title, I did get it far sooner than I got Diddy's Conquest, I have to say. But Tropical Freeze was lost on me at first. I do like the name, even though it sounds like a Mountain Dew flavor or like a slushy brand.
I thought that's why we liked it.
Well, yes. It's
Baja Blast, hello.
Right, that's where the Baja Blast joke originated. Is we always said the next game in the series would be Donkey Kong Country Baja Blast. It's just honoring Tropical Freeze's phraseology. But what a bewildering 3 minutes out of my life, Malik. And it feels like it's 20 minutes looking back on the trailer and all my reactions and how time slowed down for it. It was only 3 minutes long, but it will stay with me until I'm
dead.
Well, I'll come back as a ghost and I'll talk about it some more. But we go into every E3, or I should say we used to go into every E3 because E3 is now dead. E3 is a ghost. We went into
E3 is dead. He's not coming back.
Yeah, no. But back when E3 was still a thing, we would go into every E3 with high expectations for the DKU. Sometimes for good reason, And sometimes because that's just what you do when you're an uber fan of something, and it's just, you're like, rah, rah, rah for the home team. You know, we're going into this E3 supporting Donkey Kong, go Donkey Kong. And then inevitably you walk away with disappointment 9 times out of 10. But for whatever reason, this E3 was more low key than normal. I remember thinking, we're probably not going to get anything. And I don't know why we like reached that mindset, because like I wasn't seriously considering the possibility of a new Donkey Kong Country game being announced that day. I know retro
Neither
works.
Was I.
Yeah, I know retro works slow, but I remember our thinking after Donkey Kong Country Returns came out. Because we were still very much thinking in the 1990s model. We were thinking, okay, we get Donkey Kong Country Returns in 2010. There's probably going to be a 3DS follow-up in 2011. And then maybe we'll get a sequel in 2012. And, none of that happened. We did get Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D in 2013, right before Tropical Freeze was announced. But there was just this long period, 2 E3s in a row, where we didn't get anything. And I think we sort of just threw in the towel at that point. We were like, well, I don't know. Maybe Retro could be doing a new Donkey Kong game. But we also, I don't know if I ever said it out loud, but I was also internalizing the common wisdom at the time, or the conventional wisdom of the time. And the conventional wisdom was, of course, Retro has to go back to Metroid. Of course.
Of course.
I didn't like intellectually believe it, but I think emotionally I was absorbing some of that discourse because it was everywhere. Oh, well, Retro's done with Donkey Kong. They're going to go back to what they should be doing, which is Metroid Prime, and make Metroid Prime 4. So walking into this trailer, and I was very tired for this Nintendo Direct. I don't know if it was that I didn't sleep well the night before, but I was just kind of like, let's get it over with. So not preparing myself for this, not being braced whatsoever, I was just shellacked. I was just completely smeared with the residual slime of giddiness. And so I had to kind of reprocess after that. I had to reassess and be like, all right, well, this is the reality now. We have a new Donkey Kong game coming this November. So yeah, I got a shower afterwards, and I was just like in the shower, scrubbing myself clean. I was like, all right, this is real. This is happening. I have work to do. Got to do a conversation later in the day. What a jubilant conversation that was. But I was just like, we weren't seriously expecting this, and it's here. So this completely changes the ball game. And yeah, like from that point on, it's just magical to have a game you're really looking forward to announced, and then like it's like a perpetual Christmas Eve, if that makes any sense, where you can't wait to unwrap your gift, but just imagining it is almost as thrilling as actually getting it in your hands. And we talked about this last year on the Kongversation, the romance of the video game hype cycle episode, where for me, one of the greatest times to be a fan is when a game is announced but before it's released.
It is pretty good, I gotta say.
We haven't really had that feeling a whole lot in the last 10 years, aside from some other games in the broader DKU. But yeah, it was a great feeling. And then the bomb hadn't even fully dropped yet, Malik, because later that day. So I remember I was sitting on my front stoop because my cat, Smokey, who is, unfortunately passed on since then, she loved just going outside. Like she liked just romping around in the grass in you know, like I would always have to be with her. I wouldn't just let my cat go outside and just let her run amok. Like we would go out together on a summer day and I would let her like play for 20 minutes or so. And then I'd be like, all right, it's time to come in. And I would like, grab her and bring her in. But I was sitting out there with her and I was looking at my phone, reading the DK Vine forum, you know, still basically in full on hype stupor. Just, I can't believe this is real. I can't believe this is happening. And that's where I found out David Wise was coming back and doing the score.
It was like, oh my God, what? Why didn't they announce this earlier?
Why didn't I want to say anything? You lead with this. I
know, right?
Yeah, Michael Kelbow personally recruited David Wise to come back to do the soundtrack for the game. And that is, I think, bringing the Kremlings back times 10. Because I don't think any of us seriously considered the possibility that Nintendo would work with any Rare alum for these games. And we've had it since then too. Grant Kirkhope came back. Grant Kirkhope did new Donkey Kong music for Donkey Kong Adventure in Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle. So, you know, that's great. But at the time, it hadn't happened yet. So I think, and we talked about the possibility in 2010, but of course, come to later find out, David Wise was tied up at the time and couldn't do the soundtrack to Returns. So when he was available for Tropical Freeze, they got him. And after that, it was just like, I need to hear new David Wise music. I need to hear what he's doing for this game. And I went to Bonnaroo later that week, a story I've shared many times on the Kongversation, to hear Paul McCartney perform for the first time in my life. And it was amazing. I was right, you know, at stage. Like, basically, I could see Paul McCartney's nose hairs. And so it was pretty cool. But I remember sitting, like, in my camp chair, like, late at night. Here's footage of Tropical Freeze from E3. And I was just like trying to turn up my phone's volume to hear the music, and I couldn't really make it out, and it was so frustrating to me.
Yeah. I did the same thing too. I tried looking up any E3 footage I could find and just listen to the music and memorize it and get it just stuck in my brain, because it was like, I need to hear this right now, even if there are people talking in the background or whatever. I just need to hear it.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about the music later, but suffice to say, I think it lived up to our expectations. In the live stream, Andre says, the franchise not going HD until Tropical Freeze, shouldn't have been weird to you, given what prompted you to finally make the jump to an HD TV. So yeah, I did get an HD TV with Tropical Freeze, or maybe like a couple days before Tropical Freeze came out, in preparation for Tropical Freeze. I didn't get a Wii U until they announced Tropical Freeze. Like, I got everything at once, because there's a new Donkey Kong Country game coming out. But it is just weird. Like, we've been living in the HD and now 4K era for so long that it's weird seeing just a Nintendo Wii in its like native resolution nowadays, because you're like, what's wrong with it? Why does it look so blurry?
It's like, what?
Ew. Is this what games look like?
I did have I had an HD TV when Tropical Freeze came out, but I only ever used like the standard RCA cables, and they were like, wait a minute, we can put this in HD? And then we almost freaked out when we saw how beautiful everything looks. So Tropical Freeze made me go to HD as well.
Yeah. Colton the Robot says, I'm glad Dixie is back and isn't retired, but man, 10 years later, it still feels like they barely ever utilize her. I mean, there really hasn't been much in the way of opportunity to utilize her. It's...
Yeah.
Like, I understand, like, oh, she should have been in Smash, she should have been in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but...
She was in the movie.
She was in the movie, yeah. I think that really the lack of Dixie Kong is more owing to the lack of Donkey Kong games than it is a ulterior motive on Nintendo's part. It just, oh, well, there just isn't a space for her if there's no new Donkey Kong games. And we'll get into all of that. We'll touch upon it. So I was giddy. I was giddy for Diddy and Dixie. And this was before we knew Cranky was playable too.
Yeah.
And so of course, like, I'm in my bubble, my DK Vine bubble, and then I'm going to Bonnaroo, and so I basically have to pack up early and just remove myself from the situation and go into hibernation for the weekend and get extremely sick from sun poisoning. But I was aware of, but I didn't know how pervasive the backlash was at the time for Tropical Freeze getting announced. And of course, there wasn't backlash in every quarter of video game discussion, but in a lot of mainstream opinion, there was backlash to Retro doing, to quote Kotaku, another damn Donkey Kong Country.
Mm-hmm.
The whole should have been Metroid controversy is we've gone over this ad nauseum. It's a little bit hard to do a nostalgia episode for a topic that was contemporary when the Kongversation was still active, but it seems so quaint nowadays. But 2013, I think there was still some residual aughts era negativity towards Donkey Kong Country from a lot of
losers.
Well, yes. I was going to say, like, some older Gen X writers for video game publications, be it online or in print. And just this idea that, okay, well, Nintendo, you brought back Donkey Kong Country. That's good. It's done. You don't have to touch it again. The Wii U needs Metroid. And
yeah.
I just hated this as a fan of Donkey Kong, finally getting a little moment in the sun again and being told, well, you shouldn't have it.
No. It's like, you had your time, don't get any more. Don't get too excited.
And to pit, I hated pitting Nintendo fan bases against each other. Not even speaking to the fact that a lot of Donkey Kong fans might also be Metroid fans. Like, it isn't this either or thing. And just because Retro made their name on the Metroid Prime trilogy, it's like, so you just expect them to just go back to Metroid? But I think a lot of it was speaking to the anxiety of the Wii U at the time, and this notion that the Wii U needs this killer app. This Wii U needs this game that everybody wants to play to make everyone want to get a Wii U and to make it competitive. It was, in a lot of ways, Nintendo fandom thinking, how can we bring in the casuals? How can we bring in those with a PlayStation or an Xbox? Well, Metroid. Metroid is cool. Metroid is, like, adult, right? We need a Metroid.
Sexy lady that you play as.
And she like shoots space bugs and
dinosaurs or some crap.
It's so stupid that this became the discourse, but I mean, it even reached the point where when they did announce the fourth character, it was done so with Reggie wearing a Metroid pin on his jacket. Which I'm still not even sure what the message there was, but...
He knew.
It sucked. It sucked, Malik. How did you feel about all of this?
So I think I stayed away from most of it. I think a lot of the publications that I was looking at the time were like, oh, this is cool. It's another Donkey Kong country, but I didn't want Retro to make it. That was one thing that I did hear about, but I kind of just ignored most of it because I was too busy getting so excited about the fact that I was getting a new Donkey Kong country. It's like, okay, whatever. You guys be mad. I'm just gonna listen to Cannon Canyon or this Trunk Twister music as best as I can and drown you out.
Yeah, I think fortunately, I wasn't on Twitter at the time, and I didn't really look at other message boards or anywhere outside of DK Vine. So that was good for my mental health. Like, I think...
I wasn't on Twitter either.
The most I got from it was people on the DK Vine forum bringing the drama in. Look what they said over here. Look at this opinion. Oh, this is terrible. This is terrible. Everyone hates Donkey Kong. This game is going to bomb so hard. And it just, a lot of the hand-wringing that you see in our fandom, a lot of residual angst from the buyout era that has still never been resolved in our fandom, I would say. Like, you still see it today. So I was doing okay to shield myself, but Retro is dropping hints that there would be a fourth playable character. And this created a lot of speculation. Who's going to be the fourth playable character? We had a lot of like wacky theories at the time. Kiddy Kong was, I think, always ruled out. But I remember, like, one idea posited was, what if it's Donkey Kong Jr. and they just take a sledgehammer to the continuity of Donkey Kong? Like, there's always this fear that Donkey Kong Jr. is going to be revived, like, just fully intact as he appeared, in Donkey Kong 94 or whatever, like, similar to his appearance in Mario Tennis. And... like, they're gonna retcon that Cranky was the original Donkey Kong or some such.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're far past that point now, but
yeah.
Then another theory was, like, you've got the, like, fears, right? And then you've got the unbridled hope. What if it's K. Rool? What if K. Rool is the fourth playable character? And it's K. Rool dressed in a monkey costume.
That sounds stupid. But I won't rain on anyone's parade.
I mean, K. Rool, like, his next cosplay is of a Kong. I can see, like, I am amused by that idea. I don't know if giving him this, like, anti-hero role would really be the best use of his character, but it would bring him back. And I was like, oh, that could be fun. Really, we were missing the forest for the trees because it was Cranky Kong. And of course, once that was announced, once Cranky Kong being the fourth playable character was announced, it was like, oh yeah, it probably could have never been anyone else because it makes so much sense having Cranky Kong. I think some people maybe theorize it could be Cranky Kong, like maybe, and you would even have the DuckTales comparison, like maybe Cranky could hop around on his cane, a la Scrooge McDuck.
Yeah, and DuckTales Remastered just came out that year, so yeah, the comparisons were pretty strong.
Yeah, so it was Cranky Kong. It was revealed at the 2013 Spike Video Game Awards on Spike TV, the first network for men.
And the last.
Yeah, to show you how long ago it actually was. We had a TV network that, like, had shows like Mansers, where it's like, how big does a boob have to be to crush a beer can? Whoa! It's like, what?
Yeah, I watched a fair bit of that, ironically.
So, yeah, you had the Spike video game awards. There's no more Spike Video Game Awards. You had Spike TV. It's now the Paramount Network. And yeah, Reggie showed off some of Tropical Freeze, and the whole thing was, here's the fourth playable character, Cranky Kong. And oh boy, did people lose it all over again. People being outside of our fandom, because they got it in their head that Nintendo was going to issue a mea culpa and be like, oh, sorry, we're going to announce Metroid Prime 4 tonight. Like, what? Do you think they're going to, like, say, okay, we promise we'll start Metroid Prime 4 as soon as Tropical Freeze is out? Or it's like, we're actually scrapping Tropical Freeze and just doing Metroid Prime 4. Sorry. And this was after Tropical Freeze had already been delayed, pushed back to February, because this was December 3rd, 2013. So this was like after what was supposed to be the targeted release date, that we found out about Cranky Kong. And yeah, like, Cranky Kong was trending on social media. People were like, who the hell is Cranky Kong? This isn't an announcement, Nintendo? What's wrong with you? Good, nobody cares. Where's Metroid? No, I hate Cranky Kong. And Nintendo actually turned it around quite brilliantly by having Cranky Kong take over their Twitter account closer to the release of Tropical Freeze, and just being a snarky bastard to everyone, which was great.
Yeah, making memes.
It was one of the best things Nintendo's social media has ever done, because when has Nintendo's social media ever been that tongue-in-cheek? And, like, they're so, like, corporate and so sanitized that
squeaky clean.
To have Cranky Kong put people down from the Nintendo account. Mwah! Eat it.
All I remember is him just making a double rainbow joke.
Yeah, I mean,
you saw that, right?
Yeah. It was still playing it safe. Like, Cranky didn't go full on Donkey Kong Country 2, like, insult master, but yeah, for Nintendo, it was still pushing the envelope for them.
Oh, yeah, sure.
It was a hard
and
PG.
I felt that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also felt that the announcement of Cranky on Spike TV made sense thematically, because Cranky is an old knuckle-dragging throwback, which is perfect for Spike TV's audience, I felt.
Spike TV, Cranky Kong, he's a man. That's right. What's that growing from his face? A beard. Yeah, that's right. No, I thought that, like, once I saw Cranky Kong in action, because it's a weird leap, because Cranky Kong has always just been the supporting character, the retiree, the one who's railing against the very game that you're playing and enjoying. So to have him be playable, it's just like, that's a weird thing I have to get used to. But once you see it, once you experience it, it's like, okay, that makes sense. And of course, Cranky Kong is going to shut up. Cranky Kong is going to stop complaining, stop being a contrarian, if he can be brought out of retirement, if he can have a moment of glory. He's not going to bash Tropical Freeze, because Tropical Freeze is utilizing him the way he wants to be utilized. So it makes perfect sense. It's still consistent for the character.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then the game came out in February, and oh my god, like, Tropical Freeze finally ticked off so many long-standing desires I've had for a Donkey Kong Country game to that point. I don't know about you, Malik, but there were a lot of, like, archetypes and a lot of ideas I always wanted to see explored in a DKC game. And I was like, oh, that would be cool to have in a Donkey Kong game. Tropical Freeze did it. And specifically, I'm thinking of having a mangrove world and a savanna.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't have any expectations for anything. I was just happy with what they gave me, but I love it all the same.
Jungle Beat did have a savanna, of course. But
oh, right, first level.
right. Yeah, that was Dawn Savannah. And then in Tropical Freeze, it's bright savanna. Very different, but they feel different. And the mangrove idea was something I didn't really have until well into my adulthood, because I didn't know what a mangrove was when I was a kid.
I did.
Well,
I didn't even think about it, though.
You had better schools than I had, but what Tropical Freeze does really well is they don't just say, okay, well, it's a mangrove world. It's, what can we add to this to give it more of a unique personality, to make more of a statement, to like have it be more than just biome. It's biome with this twist. And with Lost Mangroves, it was, what if it was, in effect, a Bermuda Triangle situation for the islands in this game, what we call the Rare Archipelago. And yeah, it's just a huge ship and plane graveyard. And this brings in so many tropes and legends from both seafaring and aviation, and I think it's just right at home in the Donkey Kong series.
I think so too. Yeah, it's like it's always been there.
Yeah, and the game starts. Donkey Kong like lands in this wrecked airplane. The airplane falls from the tree, and then you can go back in the airplane, and what's in there? A cargo hold full of televisions.
What happened here?
It was our fanon back in 1999, 2000 that the Kongs like reverse engineered human technology from like having human technology wash up on their shores. So it was just very gratifying to be the very first thing you see in Tropical Freeze after the opening cinematic, Donkey Kong finding a plane full of televisions.
Water levels? Nah, mate. Televisions.
No. How?
That is cool.
Yeah. Like, how do they get that TV that they're watching in the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate trailers? Well, washed up in a Bermuda Triangle situation, obviously.
Yeah. Can't prove me wrong.
But it also, like, kind of helps explain why the Kongs, like, have, like, bleeding edge, like, coconut-based technology, but they're also, like, a couple decades in the past, like their TVs have antenna and, you know, it's like sort of out of time, and it's like they're getting hand-me-downs from human civilization and what have you. I like that theory. But yeah, like Lost Mangroves is great. I feel like Bright Savannah, it really was hitting me hard for like the first 4 levels. And then I feel like it had a steep drop-off as far as the theme of the world goes. Like, after Scorch and Torch, it just stops feeling like a savanna, and it just starts feeling like, you know, here's some canyons, and here's brambles, but they're not as good as the brambles from the other games. But I will say that I do think it lived up to the desire for a savanna biome in Donkey Kong Country. And personally speaking, Grassland Groove is one of my favorite levels in the entire Donkey Kong series.
Yeah, it's just a showcase for what Donkey Kong just is, and I think it just encapsulates everything Donkey Kong and what I love about it.
Having David Wise's music kind of be the heartbeat of the level and have it like build on itself as you progress through the level, like his take on the Lion King meets Ladysmith Black Mambazo style African harmonies, and you know, you reach that crescendo where you get to the end of level and the sunset like comes behind you and it launches into the Donkey Kong. It's beautiful. Makes you feel things like you should be feeling things in a Donkey Kong Country game. And yeah, I think it's weird that we don't really see much in the way of other actual wildlife in Bright Savannah. Like, we had more giraffes and zebras in Donkey Kong Country Returns than we do here. We just have these like parade float representations of them. But I still think it's very effective. It's still in the like toppermost of levels in the Donkey Kong series for me. I adore it. And it's one that I'll just pull up and play to kind of soothe myself. It's like an ASMR video for me. Or so I'll just play Grassland Groove and kind of get in a good state of mind.
Yeah, that's a good form. Yeah, good form of ASMR.
Meanwhile, I think a lot of people's favorite world is Autumn Heights, which kind of brought back a little bit of the DKC 3 vibe to the series.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I feel the same way. Autumn Heights is definitely a height point. I was going to say height point. It's a good high point for the game.
I think pairing it with Dixie's Return, it really did feel like even if it wasn't 100% intentional to have it be reminiscent of DKC3, it still carried that through. And it just reminds people that, hey, Donkey Kong Country can be more than just tropical jungles and caves and temples. Like, there's more going on in Donkey Kong Country than just those basic things. And to have kind of like the Bavarian hills and how you climb the mountain and things get more severe until you reach the battle with Scowl at the end. Yeah, it's wonderful. We talked about Autumn Heights quite a bit last autumn here on the Kongversation. So check that out. And Juicy Jungle is another one that people love. Just a wonderful way to innovate both the jungle archetype and the factory archetype, like two things that are tried and true in the Donkey Kong series, but like, how can you do anything original with either one? Smash them together and have an eco-friendly factory in the jungle. I thought, like I said, Retro and the creative team of Tropical Freeze were really good at not just taking things at face value and saying, how can we make it a little bit more interesting? How can we make it a little bit more in-depth? How can we make this feel like an actual real place rather than like the trope of like Planet of the Hats, like in sci-fi where just one planet is one thing. Like, oh, this is the desert planet. This is the snow planet and that's all it is. It's like, no, places are inevitably more interesting and varied than just this like shorthand that everybody thinks of. And so we got a little bit of that in Tropical Freeze, which I appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Very good stuff. It's just creativity is on full display.
And speaking of creativity, the entirety of the sixth world taking place on the frozen Donkey Kong Island. With each level,
I loved this.
Yeah, each level represents a separate world from Donkey Kong Country Returns. I think that is such a creative masterstroke, and it's a wonderful way to weave in the callbacks to the previous game in a way that never feels forced, in a way that even if you hadn't played Donkey Kong Country Returns, you still might be able to appreciate. Like, yeah, you might not know Mama Squeakly. Like, that's actually a specific character that chased you in Donkey Kong Country Returns, and now she's encased in ice. But I think you can gather from context that, oh, maybe that bat was in a past Donkey Kong game. This is Donkey Kong Island, after all.
It was really great because as a fan of Returns who, analyzed that game to heck and back, it was just so nice to see all these little landmarks in the various levels. So, oh, those are the Mugly statues. Oh wait, now we're in the cave. When we saw the Squeakly, I think we died because we were freaking out. Like, oh my goodness, it's the big Squeakly. She's frozen. Oh yeah. Crap, we just died. But that's probably why there's a checkpoint right there, because you'll probably dart over and see it. It's like, oh crap, I died. But it was great. And having the final boss take place in the volcano. Yeah. It's like, oh, we're in the volcano. We're in the center of this. It's so awesome.
It's also a great way for Retro to kind of build a little bit of nostalgia for Returns. Returns was still very recent, of course, when Tropical Freeze came out. But to have callbacks to it, to kind of integrate it more fully in the Donkey Kong series, like that's why I was very happy to see Professor Chops back. I know I give him shit. A lot of it's lighthearted, but I was very pleased to see Professor Chop's back. It's like, yeah, use your stuff. I want to grow to love all of this as much as I love the Rare era characters and environments. And it's just a lack of, appearances for them that's keeping that from me, And if you use the stuff more, it becomes more iconic in my mind.
I'm glad they were able to build on what they created.
Yeah.
It was really great to see, because I was going to say this earlier, but when I was looking up stuff about Returns having a sequel in 2011, I think Kensuke Tanabe even said, it's like, we're not thinking about a sequel right now. So I thought, well, I guess it's just a one and done thing. So I was really happy to see that he was lying and they were able to do stuff with what they had created. It's like, hey, we might not give you the Kremlings, but if you liked what we did the last time, here's a little bit of an extra little treat for you guys. Little throwbacks to what we did.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't really have much to say about Seabreeze Cove.
Seabreeze what now?
Seabreeze Cove, the water world. With all the swimming levels.
I liked how Squidicus came back. That was awesome.
I liked Squidicus. The minecart level was one of the best in the series.
Oh, yeah. Lockjaw's Saga coming back.
Yeah, March Rose in the chat said the underwater boss on this game almost ended me. Took me forever to beat it, even in funky mode. Yeah, a lot of Seabreeze Cove was, I think... It ran into the problems of underwater levels not being as fun and sometimes being just very punishing, especially the fact that there's an air meter in the game.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk a little bit about that. I do like a lot of elements of Seabreeze Cove, but it is I think the low point of the game for me.
Yeah, same here. Still a lot of good high points and memorable moments, but yeah, definitely a low point.
But yeah, like all in all, I think most of the worlds excel. They create some of the most memorable environments in the series. And yeah, it was really cool to see Retro get to flex their creative muscles a bit, because all Donkey Kong Country Returns was a soft reboot of the series. It was a legacy sequel. Sort of like The Force Awakens would be, 5 years after that, where it basically repeats the same beats of the first game. And so Donkey Kong Country Returns, aside from the cliff world and the now presence of the volcano, it was basically just mirroring Donkey Kong Country. Now you're in a jungle, now you're in temples, now you're in mines, now you're in the forest, and now you're in the factory. Yeah. And while it was fun to see what Retro did with some of those tried and true areas from the first Donkey Kong Country, having them get to just create stuff from scratch and not be beholden to this previous idea of what Donkey Kong Country was, I think they did a fantastic job. And I really wish we could have seen a third game from them to get more of it,
Yeah, definitely. If I could make Retro make nothing but Donkey Kong games, I would.
People would be so mad at you.
People would hate me.
Yeah.
I know, but I don't care.
No, I want Retro to be able to make whatever they want to be able to make. That's where I am with Rare. That's where I am with Retro. I just want somebody to be making Donkey Kong games, and we believe there is. We believe somebody is, but it's just one of those things where I would have greedily loved a third game from them, just to make it a trilogy, because everything has to come in 3, right? It's not complete unless it's a trilogy. It feels like you've just left something hanging.
Mm-hmm. Even if the third thing isn't that great, I think it just makes you appreciate what came before even more, but
Yeah. We're just so, pop culture has really just made it so, no, things come in 3. You can't just do 2 of something and not have a third one. It's not a trilogy then.
And then you get a 4th that nobody wanted. Usually for movies, not for games.
Yeah. I can't wait for Donkey Kong Love and Thunder. That's gonna be sick, man.
It's gonna make me sick, man.
I guess it'd be Donkey Kong Love and Bananas, which would actually be a great title for Donkey Kong. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about the music. A little bit more about the music, because of course I love the soundtrack to the game. I think it's one of David Wise's best score, if not his best score. But I think I sometimes forget or grow complacent over how good it actually is. Like, I've been capturing a lot of footage from Tropical Freeze recently, and I remember just stopping the other day and letting the music wash over me. And I was just like, wow, this is impactful.
I know. And like, no one talks about it.
No, in a way that a lot of video game music, especially for games of this type, just aren't. And I know Donkey Kong Country games are sort of renowned for their music and sound design, but I still forget sometimes just how mesmerizing it actually is. Like, the original Donkey Kong Country trilogy was very moody in tone. I feel like it got more cartoony as it went along, but it still could retain this ability to make you feel real resonant emotion. Whether it's David Wise or Evelyn Novakovic, like, you would get it through Donkey Kong Country 3, that these like heartstrings being pulled. You would have this gamut of emotions running through your veins. And yeah, it is a series starring anthropomorphic apes and monkeys, but the soundtrack is just this elevating force for it. People talk about the graphics of the original games and how revolutionary they were at the time. But I would argue that while the graphics might have got people to try out the game, it was the music that made it feel like it was this more immersive experience than it would have been had it just had your kind of standard video game music of 1994.
Yeah, there's really nothing else like it, honestly. Like, everyone's gone on about the music, but for good reason.
Retro's games, they have a little bit more of a cartoony style than Rare's did. Like, Rare's was hewing very closely to this, like, heightened realism. It's like, look what we can do with the computers of the mid-1990s. And we've kind of gotten away from that art style. And so like, Retro's art direction is a little bit more cartoony, a little bit more of, I've heard it compared to DreamWorks films, and just a little bit more exaggerated in like the environments, in the vegetation, in the characters themselves. And I really like the way these games look, but I understand those who, if you did grow up with the original Donkey Kong Country games, like, you expect Donkey Kong Country to maybe be a little bit more, realism is maybe the wrong word to use, but something that's a little bit less exaggerated, less hyperbolic in...
Yeah, I'm not sure what to call it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But I think the music really helps elevate the art style of Tropical Freeze and Retro's aesthetics into something that has the same level of resonance as the Donkey Kong Country trilogy did back in the 90s. Like, I can play certain levels and just feel the same emotions and the same sense of wonder and awe that I did when I was a kid playing Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong Country 2 for the first time. But yeah, I'm really terrible at discussing music because, like, as I've said before, I don't really understand music theory. I just know what I like. And I know I like...
Same here.
I know I like David Wise's music. So, sorry I can't be more in-depth there. But yeah, I think Tropical Freeze, definitely in the running for my favorite video game soundtrack of all time. Just hearing what he was able to do with modern hardware and like just a full score, and to have all of this nuance that he could never bring before. It's fantastic.
Yeah, just unrestricted David Wise.
Right, David Wise
That's
unleashed.
kind of David Wise.
Yeah. Want to talk a little bit about enemies, and I want to talk a little bit about boss fights.
Okay.
Malik, do you have any enemies in this game that really stand out in your mind? Like the baddies, and any baddies that were your favorite?
Let's see, because, okay, I'm trying to remember them by name.
Oh, well.
I did like how they...
they have some ridiculous names in this game, let me tell you. Monocle Monica.
I like that name. It's like, it's so wildly unnecessary, but I like how they just did that. I like the dozies or dozos.
So
I like those guys.
Yeah. Well, I've told you my theory about
Chumchucker Charlie.
Chumchucker Charlie. Again, it's probably the most evocative name out of the bunch.
Yeah.
I've told you my theory about the baddies in this game, right? Because in Lost Mangroves, we often see like dodos in the background or turtles that aren't part of the like Snowmad army. So you have dozies, the ones wearing like inner tubes on their necks. And then you have just standard dodos hanging out in the background. So I think Dozy is the name the Snowmads bestowed upon the dodos they brought in their ranks and like trained to attack the Kongs.
Yeah.
So it's some Snowmad like tactician who named Monocle Monica and Punchy Patty and Thug Slug.
Thug Slug. That one's stupid.
I like how you even have your limits, Malik. You're like, no, I can't abide that one. That one sucks.
Call him Slugger.
Ken Griffey Jr.'s winning slug. No, that doesn't work. Dozy's probably my favorite because that really helps sell the world building, that you have kind of this almost a Lost World Bermuda Triangle like zone that people don't venture into and leave alive. And so, yeah, why can't dodo birds still exist there? Like, they've gone extinct in the wider world, but maybe they've thrived in Lost Mangroves.
Yeah, like Donkey Kong Island had dead dinosaurs in minecarts. Let them have this. Bonehead Jed, anyone?
Bonehead Jed, yeah.
I like him too. Firehead Ned, that's another one.
I also appreciate how very few baddies came back from returns, aside from a select, like, esteemed group. Like, the Screaming Pillars were back to provide a little bit of representation for the Tiki Tech tribe, but it felt appropriate that they would be in the savannah. And I really, really enjoyed how they were on fire thanks to the fire and scorching torch.
Yeah.
And, like,
I liked that too, actually.
Rare, it's very easy to overlook, but Rare would also really create just whole new enemy types for each Donkey Kong Country game. Like, Naughties only appeared in Donkey Kong Country and Donkey Kong Land, and then we moved on to Neeks, and then we moved on to Sneaks. And so, like, I like that Retro didn't just say, like, well, we've created baddies, we're just going to use those. It's like, no, let's do all new ones all over again and bring back a couple that feel appropriate, like Snaggles or Screaming Pillars. So yeah. I also just really like a lot of their designs. I'm not really sold on Monocle Monica, sorry, but most of the other ones are cool with me. And as far as bosses go, I think my two favorite, and some people are divided on this one, the fight with Scowl the Startling in Autumn Heights. I really like that fight. I know some people think it goes on way too long and it's way too drawn out, but I like that about most of the boss fights in this game, how epic they feel.
Yeah, I wish they had an ending cutscene like in Returns instead of just zooming right into the beatdown, but
Yeah.
I do like the whole cinematic approach they took with all these guys.
And the other one I really, really love, Bashmaster.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Scowl and Bashmaster too. That seems like a safe bet.
And with Bashmaster, you have that wonderful opening cinematic of him enjoying the ice lolly, and then the Kongs come down and he loses the ice lolly, and he's mad about losing the ice lolly because he was having a lovely little popsicle break. And Bashmaster himself is just a terrific design, and he just feels so at home in the Donkey Kong Country series. Like when we saw imagery of Bashmaster, I think we called him like Badass Bear or something because we didn't know his name. But he was just like, oh my god, there's a polar bear. Look how mean he
it's
looks.
It's not Bjorn.
Yeah, and so they're just getting a bear in Donkey Kong games again was cause for celebration. We're simple folk, Malik. We don't ask for much. At the end of the day.
Yeah, same here.
Give us a bear
I'm
and
easy.
We're happy.
We're good to go. We'll make our own fun.
Other creative touches, like, in Returns, the bosses would change color to show you what stage of the boss fight you're on. And, like, with Bashmaster, his color changes because he keeps falling in the juice. And so it gets more and more pinkish purple. And it's just that level of creativity, that thinking of, okay, how do we convey traditional video game logic in a more realistic, sensible fashion? Something the Donkey Kong Country games, I think, always did fairly well. Like, okay, we're going to try to refrain as much as we can from floating platforms and other video game conventions. Just because Mario did it doesn't mean we have to do it. Let's come up with an explanation for a lot of the stuff, this internal logic that makes this world just feel a little bit more tangibly real. Like you could actually live in it. And Retro really, I don't think they get enough credit for what they've done because they, like, everything in their games has logic. Everything is connected to something. And sometimes it, comes apart in this like chaotic Rube Goldberg style sequence at the end of every level. But yeah, little things like Bashmaster changing color because he keeps falling in the juice of the factory. And then that shows you what stage of the boss fight you're on. Like being able to convey that in a way that doesn't break the immersion of the universe you're in is... It's almost Greg Malesian in, like, we don't want to have all this video game nonsense cluttering the visuals. So how can we communicate to the player what's happening in a way that makes sense and doesn't break the world? I love it.
Definitely. I like that. Yeah. We should use Malesy instead of Miyamoto-y.
I've got an episode in the works that might get into it a little bit.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, thank Just Andre. Just Andre is the one who suggested it. And I was like, that's a good idea. We're going to do it.
Yeah. Thanks, Just Andre.
Just Andre, I see your comments and, I'm going to get to it in just a second. I think, honestly, the only boss fights I don't really care for in this game, Baboom and Fugu. March Rose already spoke to how hard the Fugu fight is. I just don't feel like either one is as kinetic as the others, and I'm including Pompey and Lord Frederick in there as well. Because they all have this like very... I think Josh from Off the Geek Critique would call it crunchy, but they have a very crunchy sensibility in the platforming, where it feels very satisfying to progress in the boss fight, where Baboom and Fugu feel a lot more reactive, where you're just on defense all the time.
Okay, we gotta wait.
And I don't feel like it's communicated as well in those boss fights what you're supposed to do at first. So there's a lot of trial and error, where with Pompey and Scowl and Bashmaster and Lord Frederick, you figure it out pretty much immediately from context.
Yeah.
That being said, I do like the designs of Baboom and Fugu. And you know, I always like villainous monkeys or apes in the Donkey Kong series. It's something that I'm glad Tropical Freeze delved into, but I will say, don't understand why Baboom is a mandrill and not
I was about to say that.
Not a Japanese macaque, a snow monkey sitting in a hot spring or something.
Yeah, Baboom is the outlier in terms of all the Arctic creatures, but maybe Baboom would die in the heat. I don't know. Maybe they thought about that a bit too much.
Well, I know I've shared this theory before. I always thought he was a native of Bright Savannah who defected to the Snowmads.
I like that idea.
That's the only idea that makes sense.
Why not?
But yeah, it's a little irritant there for me because I always wanted a mandrill in the Donkey Kong series because, you know, The Lion King came out right before Donkey Kong Country. So it introduced to what a mandrill was to a lot of 90s kids. And you're like, oh, well, when are we going to get a mandrill in the Donkey Kong series? And we finally did, and he's this loser who's a snowmad. In
a somewhat unrelated story, I remember drawing a mandrill in art class, and one of my, what's the word, colleagues, like, a mandrill? Is that some kind of Pokemon? It's like, oh my god.
A Mankey, what is that, some sort of Pokemon? Well, yes, but also. So let's talk a little bit about the controversies of the game. Now, we already talked about should have been Metroid, but this actually provides us an avenue for Andre's comment. Now, I'm going to read this verbatim because it's lengthy. Just Andre wrote in the live stream chat, here's something. Tropical Freeze's delay to February reportedly caught even Retro off guard, despite the official word from Nintendo being that it was being given a few extra months for Retro to polish it further. So the common assumption in the years since is simply that Nintendo opted not to release Tropical Freeze and Mario 3D World back to back. There was a lot of consternation on the Kongversation. Kongsternation. Following news of Tropical Freeze's middling sales, with fingers often pointing to Nintendo dumping it in February. But do you still agree with that mindset? Or in retrospect, do you think that giving Tropical Freeze its own chunk of the calendar to call its own was more beneficial to any of the alternative ways they could have handled its release? And do you think delaying it further still to, say, early summer might have given it its best possible chance to succeed commercially?
I don't think anything could have saved Tropical Freeze's sales on the Wii U.
Yeah,
that's just my opinion.
The Wii U was always going to struggle with sales. And I think because the Wii U had less of a user install base, and I'm going to make the assumption that a lot of them were hardcore Nintendo fans who may not necessarily be hardcore Donkey Kong fans. Tropical Freeze was always going to have an uphill climb. I do think that it kind of got the short end of the stick a little bit still. Like, I don't know if moving release dates would have given it a better chance. It's just one of those things where the Wii U was already dying on the vine when Tropical Freeze was announced. So if it's not a big Mario game, if it's not a big Zelda game, I don't know if it would have found its audience. Donkey Kong Country Returns did so well because a lot of people had a Wii. And Donkey Kong Country is something that, for whatever reason, grabs a lot of, I don't want to use the term casuals, but it brings in a lot of normies. People who don't live
I think normies is worse.
Okay, that's worse? All right. I'm trying to compliment them. You're normal. You're normal people who don't complain about Donkey Kong on the internet. But
what's wrong with you?
Donkey Kong Country is very popular with people who don't live and breathe Nintendo. And whether it's because of the way things transpired with the buyouts and popular opinions at the time, but a lot of Nintendo fans, not every Nintendo fan, not even most Nintendo fans, but enough Nintendo fans were conditioned to turn up their nose at the idea of Donkey Kong Country with everything else, you know? So I think it was an uphill climb. I think the reaction to Tropical Freeze's announcement was but a reflection of the uphill climb it would face on a platform like the Wii U. I think Tropical Freeze had more success on the Switch because the Switch has a far wider install base. And also, by that point in 2018, enough time had passed that the hot takes of 2013 going into 2014, I'll never forget GameSpot gave it that scathing review when it came out. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, I left a comment saying, don't trust this review.
Yeah.
I was like, just don't. This is objectively wrong.
Like, in the year or two before the Switch port of Tropical Freeze was announced, you started seeing a lot of think pieces about how Tropical Freeze was this underrated gem. And I think anybody who played it back then could have told you that, played it with a clear conscience and no ulterior motive going into it. And you know, I probably had an ulterior motive going into it. I don't think I could be objective when it's a Donkey Kong Country game and I'm sort of defending it from this onslaught of negativism. But like a lot of even-handed people like would come out with these pieces in 2016, 2017 saying, hey, Tropical Freeze, what the hell? That was like a 5-star game. Why did it get the reaction it got? And so that kind of tilled the earth a little bit and got people ready for the Switch port. And by that point, the Switch was already a success. And this was just another Wii U port. And sure, you got the people complaining about, well, the Wii U has no original games. You just bring it all to the Switch. Well, the Wii U was a colossal failure, and Nintendo wanted to recoup their losses. And, you know, quite honestly, I'm just glad that Tropical Freeze did find an audience on the Switch. It's a goddamn relief because it's a brilliant game, and it didn't deserve the lukewarm reaction it got. Tropical Freeze, haha. But it, you know, it was heartbreaking to see it. And there's no good reason for it other than it not being this idea of what people thought would save the Wii U. And why is that up to Retro? Why is that, you know, like, why does Donkey Kong have to be on the chopping block? You know, why can't we just have a really good Donkey Kong game on top of everything else?
Yeah. Retro has enough on their plate, trust me.
So yeah, Andre, like that's, I think, a question I don't really have a good answer for because I honestly don't know. I think back then, yeah, the thought was, well, February's a dumping ground. But just like it used to be, right, like in Hollywood terms, if you're not releasing your movie in the summer, then you don't have faith in your movie. Like, you know, there was the January dumping ground for Hollywood movies that they thought were just going to bomb anyway. And then Avatar came out and really like revitalized the whole notion of releasing something in December. You can like dominate the box office in December. And now we're at the point, especially post-COVID, where just release a movie whenever. Who cares? Like this idea that you have to release something at a certain time or it's not going to get the attention it deserves has also now applied to video games. It used to be, oh, you got to release it around the holiday shopping season or maybe the summer, or people just won't be paying attention. It's a ridiculous notion now because it's a 365 day a year industry. People are always playing video games. So I think we've seen a lot of big budget releases in February now. A lot of, it's no longer a dumping ground. That was the thought back then. I don't agree with it now, but also the industry has changed a little bit.
Yeah.
I do think that maybe like Nintendo could have marketed it better, but that's just second guessing. That's, Monday morning quarterbacking, however you want to frame it in an analogy. I think it was just the Wii U. Lukewarm sales aside, it eventually found its audience. It's now regarded as a classic. And I think the weird dramas of should have been Metroid, I think they've subsided. I hope they have. We'll see what the reaction is when the next Donkey Kong game is announced, especially if it's in lieu of anything else. If it is towards the launch of the next console, and it's Donkey Kong, and it's not something people like. Well, it's like, why are you doing Donkey Kong?
Metroid Prime 4 still isn't out.
Well, that's true. That is true. At least Metroid fans have gotten Metroid Dread since then.
I loved Dread.
All right. Well, even though it's now more warmly embraced by the larger video game playing population, there are some in the Donkey Kong fan community, not many, but some, who have turned on the game in recent years. And I admit I occasionally get a bit sour when this topic comes up, when I think of how every other franchise seems to be able to celebrate the totality of its history, while it's always somehow considered wrong for Donkey Kong and Rare in general. Like, almost as if there's some lingering conventional wisdom from the buyout era where, no, you can't celebrate that. That's no good.
Yeah, it's like, what, naughties? You can't talk about naughties. We can talk about Goombas all day, but naughties? No, don't touch those.
Well, yeah, the lack of any other classic returning characters outside of Dixie and Funky. Because remember, Donkey, Diddy, Cranky, Rampy, and Squawks, they were already in Donkey Kong Country Returns.
Yeah.
It has touched a nerve for some people in the years since. Even though we were all very excited about Dixie being back in Tropical Freeze, and then Funky, Funky running the flying by in the original version, and then playable in New Funky mode in the Switch port. But especially when you see other franchise revivals that just revel in their history, just celebrate everything. And Donkey Kong fans seldom get that. Rare fans seldom get that. And it is frustrating. And creative director of the game, Vince Jolie, did mention in an interview with Retro Gamer that they considered bringing Enguarde back. Because Enguarde is always the one people bring up. If it's not about the kremlings, then they bring up Enguarde. It's like, how did you not have Enguarde in this game? And
Rambi, Enguarde, and Squawks are like a holy trinity.
Yeah. They're the ones that were brought back from Donkey Kong Country into Donkey Kong Country 2, and I think really stuck out in people's minds as the iconic trinity of animal buddies. Well, this is what Vince Jolie said in Retro Gamer, and I quote, "We were thinking that bringing back the familiarity that players experienced in Donkey Kong Country Returns would be a good way for us to further strengthen their love for these characters." Which I agree. We felt that this was the right choice over adding different buddies in their stead, and we believe the introduction of the other Kongs filled the need for expanding the character lineup and adding new player mechanics. However, we would have loved to have introduced some new animal buddies, like Enguarde, for instance, who did come close to being added. So, I love Tropical Freeze, and I don't want anybody to think otherwise, but I will maintain it was the wrong decision to exclude Enguarde, because I've heard the justification that, well, the Kongs can do all this underwater. Why do you need Ungard? Well, why do you need Rambi? Rambi's there. Rambi is just this on-ground tank for the Kongs. Ingard could have been the underwater version of that. Ingard could have been a submarine to torpedo enemies with, you charge enemies and unlock secrets with his bill. I mean, that's what Ingard does in the original games. He could have done that here. And I think I don't know what it is, but there's this blind spot when it comes to the animal buddies. And this started back in the Rare era too. Like, I'm not letting Rare off the hook here. I don't think they realize how much the animal buddies mean to Donkey Kong fans and how much we obsess over them as much as the Kongs and the Kremlings. For me, like,
they're our buddies, man.
Yeah, it's one of the vital components of the Donkey Kong Country series, and really the Donkey Kong series as a whole at this point, where the part of the thrill is you get to have these rollicking adventures through natural environments, and occasionally you get to do it on the back of a wild animal. It's just fun. And
yeah,
I would have taken a couple Animal Buddy sequences over some of the Rocket Barrel levels, for example. Like, I don't hate the Rocket Barrel, but I feel like the Rocket Barrel isn't as satisfying as flying around with Squawks.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Interesting. I like how you're trying to remain neutral there. You're like, I'm
just trying to picture that in my head, and I was like, what? I'm just thinking.
Well, like, Squawks wouldn't have to play.
Squawks flew like a rocket barrel.
Well, no, Squawks wouldn't have to play like a rocket barrel. But I'm saying, like, we still have the rocket barrel stages in there, but maybe have one or two less, and maybe there's a level where you fly around with Squawks and see what you can do with that a little bit. I don't know.
Yeah. I'd like to fly with Squawks again. Just give him like some potion to make him big, and something like that. Cranky could make it.
Yeah, I've said that if you want to follow the Donkey Kong Country Returns formula with a new Donkey Kong Country game at some point, make Squawks playable again. And if you want to have the parrot sniffing out puzzle pieces, put in Quawks, or maybe use Talks now that Talks is a thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, get Squawks back out there in the field, because Squawks is fun. Squawks is such a brilliant way they tweaked his character in Donkey Kong Country 2 and made for some of the most memorable levels in both that through Donkey Kong Land 3. So anyway, I'm currently compiling a video of every Easter egg and reference in Tropical Freeze. And it kind of sticks in my craw just a little bit. The Mario franchise is referenced or homaged as much or more in Tropical Freeze than shoutouts to the classic Donkey Kong Country games.
Yeah, same here.
Like, why?
Stay in your lane, bro.
Why? Like, who is this for?
I know, right? What's next? An Earthbound reference?
Like, that being said, as we mentioned, Retro does build on many elements from Returns itself, which I do love, and I appreciate all of the returning characters and environments and concepts from that game, because that just helps strengthen that familiarity, as Vince Jolie said. But, I also understand that while that stuff will never mean as much to me as the Rare era stuff, it doesn't mean that it won't to somebody else. It just means I didn't grow up with it. But for anybody who grew up with Donkey Kong Country Returns or Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, that stuff means just as much as Squitter or Baffle Bear or Banana Birds or any of that nonsense. So I do try to maintain perspective and think, okay, well, even though it's not referencing Donkey Kong Country or Donkey Kong Country Barrel Maze or anything from the archives, it is referencing Donkey Kong Country Returns. And if we're to factor in the references to Returns, and then it does have more Donkey Kong references than Mario references or Metroid references, but just come on. Just give us a little bit something
would
more.
Would it really kill you?
And yeah, look, Professor Chops, just as much a part of the Donkey Kong series as Swanky Kong. Just gonna have to get used to that reality.
At least one of them is still on this mortal coil. Oh wait, no, he's not dead. What am I talking about?
Yeah, he's just heavily singed and battered in traction.
Yeah. He'll be fine.
I think another thing, and this probably isn't as widespread or universal as it feels. It just in my quarters, in my bubble. Impossible Lair, Ukulele and Impossible Lair coming out in 2019, invited a direct comparison of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze and created this debate about which one is truly better. And I love this debate, by the way, because I don't think there's a clear-cut answer. I think each one has its advantages and disadvantages. They're almost like a pair in my mind now, because you have Ukulele and Impossible Lair, which feels very much like, what if veterans from Rare created their own Donkey Kong Country 4? And it's almost like a tangent timeline, obviously with ukulele characters. But what Playtonic was able to do with that game was they punched so far above their weight class with Impossible Lair. And you know, it can never match the higher budgeted spectacle of Tropical Freeze. Tropical Freeze had more money behind it. They had more resources. And Tropical Freeze is truly spectacular. It's more dynamic. It's more exciting. But I feel like Impossible Lair in many ways might be more innovative. At the very least in making...
I think so too.
In making every aspect of the game fun. I think it has a cleaner collectible system. You've got those numbered twit coins, which I vastly prefer over the puzzle pieces in both Returns and Tropical Freeze. You know, the tonics are there. I really, really love Impossible Lair. And also, another thing Impossible Lair does, I think it has more references to classic Donkey Kong Country games than Tropical Freeze does. Weirdly enough.
Yeah. They reference On Guard more than Tropical Freeze.
It's weird. That being said, Malik, I think it's impossible for me to like weigh one or the other. I think I have Tropical Freeze tied with Impossible Lair in my rankings, and I think it's going to be that way because for me, if you could somehow combine the two, it would be the perfect Donkey Kong Country game.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't.
Yeah, I think so too.
So I'm just happy having both of them. I don't think having Impossible Lair diminishes Tropical Freeze at all. And in many ways, it makes me appreciate what Tropical Freeze does do all the more, and vice versa. It was just it's really cool to have, because how often can you have like a lot of the original creatives, not all of them, but a lot of the original creatives behind a franchise make a spiritual successor in a way that feels like they're not just going backwards. Like, how would they take the series forward if they got to make the Legacy sequel? And that's
it's a different kind of feeling.
Yeah.
But it still feels cool all the same. It's like, whoa. I'm not saying whoa in the same way I'm playing Tropical Freeze, but it's still giving me like that weird euphoria, I think the word is.
Yeah.
It still feels good, but in a different way.
Now, in Retro's defense, because we're talking about criticisms of the game, Retro genuinely listened to a lot of fan complaints about Returns. They internalized them and they tried to make good on what they could. And I really like Donkey Kong Country Returns. When I say that, do not get me wrong, I adore Returns as well. But with Tropical Freeze, they went out of their way to rectify what they were allowed to rectify, at least under Tanabe's direction. Because I know Tanabe has some weird mandates about what they could and could not do. And it might have held them back from really delving into some of the stuff that we would have liked to have seen. But the big one I always come back to is how improved the map screen is from Returns. It's a small thing, ultimately, but Returns just had that simple character token, and there was there's no real sense of place with Returns map screen. And by tweaking that and having the actual characters romping around on the island environments and barrel blasting from one island to another, small tweak, but it really, really makes me feel like I'm on an adventure and not just playing a video game.
Yeah, it makes all the difference. I was like, oh my god, it's just... Even New Super Mario Brothers had regular the Mario going through the map.
Yeah.
Like in Donkey Kong. He was the first one... Actually, no, he wasn't the first one to do it.
No.
But you know what I mean.
No. Like, it's weird because a lot of Donkey Kong Country Returns was reactive to the success of the new Super Mario Brothers series. But then, like, the token thing, like, what's that about? What? Like, maybe
Why'd you skimp on this?
Maybe they couldn't figure out how to animate the characters going up the island. And so they just, like, threw up their hands and they're like, we're just not going to do it. But they get around that in Tropical Freeze by barrel blasting up Donkey Kong Island, so...
Yeah. So there's no excuse for anyone else.
Yeah, exactly.
Later on.
Yeah, I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it in a Donkey Kong game going forward.
No excuses.
Getting rid of Super Kong and Super Diddy. They were completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure there would have been people who used them, but all it was this annoyance. And this reminder that a level's kicking your ass to have Professor Chops ringing that bell and being like, hey, you can effectively cheat and just have these better CPU characters do it for you, but you won't get any of the puzzle pieces. And it's just like, if you're selling
these losers.
if you're selling your game on being like super hard and super challenging for the average platform fan, well, they're not going to go for this. And also...
Nope, I never did.
And also, I really just didn't like how lazy the characters of Super Kong and Super Diddy were. Just Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong with white fur and blue clothing.
Yeah. I don't know how they came... I would love to hear how they came up with the color scheme.
Yeah, for me, it's just completely antithetical to how thoughtful Donkey Kong Country usually is about its world. It's like, who are these jokers? Like, what is this?
Why couldn't it have been like yellow? Why couldn't they have worn yellow?
Well, no,
like
not
costumes.
I'm not talking about the color of their clothes. I'm just talking about their identities. Like, who is Super Kong? What is this about?
Yeah.
Have something different. Like, I've always said you could have had Wrinkly Kong's spirit possessing Donkey Kong and just like guiding him through the level while he's possessed by his dead mom.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
That's almost too good.
Yeah. But they got rid of Super Kong and Super Diddy, and I think it was for the best. They got rid of the blowing mechanic in Returns. Miyamoto suggested it. It added very little to the gameplay of Returns. And in its place, they added plucking, like lifting things from the ground, which felt far more at home in a Donkey Kong Country game. Tanabe gets a lot of grief from fans. He's kind of become sort of a boogeyman as like, oh, why wasn't this in Tropical Freeze? Oh, Tanabe decreed it. So there's some truth to that. I think it's kind of gotten overblown in some sectors of fan discourse, but Tanabe was spot on with this suggestion. Super Mario Brothers 2, which he directed, and Donkey Kong Country, I feel like they often have shared sensibilities, which is why I love Super Mario Brothers 2 so much. Or maybe being a Super Mario Brothers 2 fan first, it's why I like Donkey Kong Country so much. But it was just nice to add that, and as well as bringing back the ability to throw certain baddies, which was in Super Mario Brothers 2, but also was utilized in Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3. So it just felt a lot less obtrusive for the gameplay to stop and pluck something rather than stop and gently blow something.
Blow the roses.
Yeah, which I see what Miyamoto was going for, and I do think it makes sense a little bit for Donkey Kong's world. It just was never that gratifying from a gameplay perspective.
It would have been nice if he used the blow mechanic when he was having that birthday cake in Tropical Freeze.
Yeah, well,
he never got to use it.
That's why
that was the end of the blow mechanic.
Yeah, he went to do it, and then he was interrupted by the snowflake burning out his candle, and then he just lost the will to blow anything from that point on.
Yep, it's like, okay, this ain't gonna work. Now it's war. Now it's on.
It's like I'll never blow a dandelion again. My will to do so has been snuffed out because my birthday party was ruined.
Hasn't that happened to all of us at one point or another?
I haven't had a birthday party since I was a kid.
You still get birthday cakes though, right?
I haven't in a long time.
Oh. I'm not laughing at that, but okay.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I do things for my birthday. Like I go places. I go into nature. I blow on things that aren't candles.
Okay.
No, that sounded dirty. What I meant was I like blow on dandelions and shut up. Look,
you could just pluck things out of the ground for your birthday now.
Well, I don't really want to do that. I don't want to rip up flowers or anything, or it's
like weeds.
As a hiker, hikers and campers have a mantra like leave no trace, like have no impact.
Right. Nothing but pictures.
Yeah, and maybe it's different if I'm looking for collectibles to take back my island, which has been commandeered by Vikings who have frozen it. Maybe I would feel different then, but as it stands, I have no reason to pull up anything from the ground. So okay. Yeah, like criticisms aside, Tropical Freeze is still in my top 10s games list, and I feel like it, maybe it makes some missteps in serving as a Donkey Kong Country sequel, but what it gets right is so phenomenal that I ultimately just don't care. Like, yeah, I would have loved Engard, would have loved a little bit more references, but here's the thing. Here's my point. I hate this notion that you can't criticize something you love because it doesn't mean you love it. Like, I feel like fandom and critical analysis has devolved into either something is flawless, just pure, immaculate, perfection, or it's absolute trash, and there can't be any middle ground. And I don't even think Tropical Freeze...
I feel the same way.
I don't even think Tropical Freeze operates in a middle ground, because it's mostly superlative. It's mostly perfection. Every work of art, though, can have flaws. You can have critique. You can have criticism. Doesn't mean you're not grateful for it. Doesn't mean you can't love it and admire it and revel in it. You can still be critical of something you really enjoy, nay, love, and not have it diminish what it means to you. And that's where I'm at with Tropical Freeze. Like, yeah, I'll bring up how they really should have had Engard in there. Doesn't mean I'm slagging off on the game. Doesn't mean I don't adore it. Just a matter of reality,
Yeah.
One other criticism that I've seen leveled at it, and a lot more frequently now that we've gotten past the should have been Metroid nonsense, and really have just evaluated the game on its own merits, I hear that the game is too difficult, that it's too challenging. How do you feel about that?
Let's see. I don't think it's too hard. That might just be because I play a lot of hard platformers and stuff, but I feel like Returns is a lot... No, not Returns. Tropical Freeze. I feel like Tropical Freeze is a lot fairer than Returns was in terms of difficulty and getting through stuff. I feel like if you just sit down and, really apply yourself, I think anybody can get through it because they give you a lot of help. I don't think it's too hard.
Yeah, like I think it's a stupid complaint. Like the only things I would critique Retro's Donkey Kong Country games on, as far as challenge goes, maybe the underwater portions having an air meter kind of makes them a bit of a slog, and it limits exploration, which I think is a pillar of any Donkey Kong Country game. Like, you want to have the freedom to explore your surroundings, and to limit that with an air meter to always be fretting over it. Oh, I need to find one of the scuba masks, letting out the air bubbles. It just makes it this kind of timed affair that I really loathe about Super Mario Brothers games. But that being said, like, that's mitigated with new funky mode. If you play that, you know, it's got his little scuba mask. You can just explore to your heart's content. But I also feel like the time attack mode is still miserable. It's just not fun. It requires this absolute level of perfection without any deviation from how Retro deems how you can get through these and get the shiny gold medal. Like, it's just, it's so brutal that I don't even understand how you can get the shine. I've never gotten, I think I might have gotten a shiny gold once across both of Retro's Donkey Kong Country games. And then I just had to just give up because I just can't do it. And maybe I'm just bad. Yeah. Maybe I'm just bad at speedruns. DK Vine done slow and all that. But damn, I've never seen a time attack mode this difficult.
Yeah, I didn't bother with it shortly after Returns came out. It's like, oh, this is kind of cool, but I suck at it.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
Also, just the general principles behind hard mode. Like, I just don't feel like it's that fun. There's no true payoff for reaching 200%. And, you know, I don't care for the only time you can play as the other Kongs in single player being in a more punishing mode where you only have one heart. It would have been fun to be able to play as them in the normal game and not have it be this tenuous, precarious situation where, you know, you can't get hit and you have no checkpoints. Just I don't like mirror mode in Returns. I don't like hard mode in Tropical Freeze. I'm glad they gave us the ability to play as the other Kongs in single player to some capacity. I just wish they could have come up with something a little bit more reasonable. I don't know if that's the right word to use, but
yeah, it's a little it feels a little punishing.
Yeah, as the core gameplay of the main game itself, yeah, it's challenging, but I never feel like it's too brutal as to be unfun. Like, it's one of those things where it's going to kick your ass, but you're going to be tantalized enough to want to keep going back in. And as you get a little bit better, as you figure out each area that's difficult to overcome, you're going to get in a swing of things. Like, I understand the complaint from the perspective of kids. I do get that a lot of kids had trouble getting into Returns and Tropical Freeze because of how hard they were. And it might have stunted some potential lifelong Donkey Kong fans. Like, basically snuff them out in their cribs effectively. Like,
yeah.
I don't
natural selection.
Yeah. I don't like this game because it's too hard. I'm going to put down this game and just play New Super Mario Brothers again. And, you know, to be fair, I didn't play them until I was an adult who had already been weaned, who had already trained on the original trilogy and Donkey Kong Land games for that matter. So I do understand that critique if you're looking at it from the youth perspective. But that being said, new funky mode. Again, I think it does a lot as far as taking the edge off. And hopefully kids were able to have a good time with that eventually.
Yeah. I think a lot of people really like new funky mode, even if they've already played Tropical Freeze's base game. They just like new funky mode because it opens the door for a lot more fun opportunities.
It is fun to just
I'd like to try it myself.
Like, as somebody who just doesn't get hung up on, I've got to prove I'm a hardcore gamer at all times. It is just fun to be able to go into the game with a little bit more leeway and to be able to, like, enjoy and experience the nuances of the levels without always having to worry about how close to death you are.
Yeah. I've paid my dues. I just want to chill.
There you go. Exactly. And who's better to chill with than Funky?
Exactly.
And personally speaking, like, I really, really like that Retro decided to make Donkey Kong Country like the advanced class for 2D platforming. Like, they didn't even roll back to the first Donkey Kong Country in terms of difficulty. They said, like, okay, well, we're gonna pick up where Donkey Kong Country 3 left off. And if you're not good enough, well, sucks for you. It like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It helps set Donkey Kong Country apart from Kirby or Super Mario or other 2D platformers. And speaking to another thing it does differently, I really like the long levels. I know it's a bit much for some people, but Donkey Kong Country games, especially 2 and 3, I feel like they have longer levels than Super Mario Brothers games do. And it's just another thing that helps set the series apart. And Tropical Freeze just amplified to an absurd degree. But, you know, right down to the Mountain Dew-esque sounding name, you got to go extreme with it if you're doing Donkey Kong Country.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I do like the longer levels. It feels like, I don't know, it kind of makes up for the fact that there's not as many in Tropical Freeze compared to Returns.
Yeah.
I felt serious quality over quantity. That's the one.
Yeah, like, would I have liked another world in there? Maybe, but I also really like that we squeezed the most out of every single environment.
Yeah. I like, good stuff.
Yeah. Looking in the live stream chat really quick, just Andre suggests the way to do it would have been to either earn the right to play as the other Kongs in non-hard mode by 100%ing hard mode first, or for the Switch version, make funky modes hard mode only as difficult as the default game. And Mark Rose says, I am very bad at video games no matter how much I play, but I was able to beat the game with new funky mode and it was still a lot of fun. I like the longer levels, just not the boss battles. And that's a good insight there, that new funky mode was actually an effective middle ground. You know, I'm honestly bad at video games too. If I'm good at any video game, it's just because I stick with it and I learn by repetition. And if I like a video game enough, I'm going to do it. Like, I'm not going to just tap out. So, because I love Donkey Kong Country games so much, I have, like, forced myself to get good at them. But I wouldn't say I'm a natural either. And, I think because I have the prior experience, the retro games weren't too challenging for me. And then New Funky Mode is just this nice, relaxing way to experience the game, which I really appreciate having.
Yeah.
All right, well, Malik, we have some calls to take about the 10th anniversary of Tropical Freeze. I have a feeling these are going to run across the spectrum from, Tropical Freeze is great, to it's been terrible that we haven't had a new Donkey Kong game in 10 years. And if you would like to call the conversation, dial the DK Vine hotline at 1-202-630-VINE. That's 8463. The first caller is spread across the first two calls, so why don't we play those back to back?
Sure.
Hyle, Malik, you both, hearing your voices, it's just music to my ears. You both look beautiful, you both look astounding. Hyle, hearing your voice lately is like desert. It's like an oasis in a desert, excuse me. I've been waiting for my Luigi at the Big Sausage content. It is me, Traveler of the Stars, by the way. The number one Luigi at the Big Sausage fan. After, of course, you, Jeff, and the entire DK Vine staff, frankly. No, but let's get into it. Speaking of Luigi at the Big Sausage, Lederhosen. Speaking of that, Oktoberfest. Speaking of that, Autumn Heights. Speaking of that, Donkey Kong Country, Tropical Freeze. Wow, this gaming, I guess it's over 10 years old now. I remember when I was going at a dentist appointment. Remember the day it came out, and after that, my mom drove me to Target, and I got the game, and I was a really big fan of it, because I was a really big fan of Returns, because that was sort of my big tentpole game. I mean, I think my first game was actually like Jungle Climber or something. I can't really remember, but regardless. Yeah, it's kind of weird that we haven't gotten a big Donkey Kong game for a while. I'm sure you're gonna, go over once again the story history and how Donkey Kong is not only, not bad or anything like that, yada, yada, yada. I will just say, I do vaguely remember, of course, you talked about it a lot, the reaction from Metroid fans, not just Metroid fans, excuse me, a bunch of, Nintendo fans and people in general, lamenting how there's no Donkey Kong game and, wasn't a Metroid game and, kind of got really overlooked, at the time. And now, and I guess maybe we'll talk about it, the reception of the game has really just done a 180. I know, of course, you and the staff may have your own quibbles with it, but, at the end of the day, for better or for worse, the general consumer, the general audience, I'm glad should have been there, but when you look at the perception and the talk of the game, I mean, they're not really going to care about that, They really care about, wow, this platforming is amazing, this music is amazing, the visuals are amazing. I mean, I think you brought it up before, but it's probably like the biggest, it's a quadruple A title, unlike Skull and Bones. Not really, I don't actually think it's a quadruple A title, but it's just so big budget. And I think I'm coming to the end of my call here, so I'm going to call back because I have a lot to say. So sorry in advance if I ramble. Hello, Traveler Stars again. Okay, I'm going to try and be more focused. You know me, Hyle. I like to talk. I already like to talk in general, but with your show, you conditioned me to talk a bit. And I'm just so delighted the opportunity to share my thoughts with my dear friend, Hyle Russell of the DK Vine Empire. So, yeah, I guess the point I want to make is that, if the series had to go into hibernation for 10 years, what a great game to go into hibernation, out of. I mean, I think right now definitely there's a fair concern, maybe a little bit, there's a lot of like Donkey Kong and Mario content, and so I know some people are a little worried about that. In my opinion, and maybe we'll talk about it, and maybe we've talked about it before, I'm seeing a lot of a lot more negativity. I was like anything like a little Mario thing. See some Donkey Kong fans be like, this is Mario, and this is Mario stuff, and Donkey Kong's dead, Dixie Kong's dead, everything's dead. I'm like, come on, again, just as talked about this before, I understand if you just care about the game, the big tentpole game, I understand if you are like, Donkey Kong, it's just dead. But also I don't understand, because there's all this other stuff that, again, you talked about before. I don't need to talk about, $1 billion theme park or whatever, meaning something. But it does mean something, and I just wish people would remember that. But regardless, I don't need to go over every little thing about Tropical Freeze. The music is great. Everything is great. Yada, 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 yada. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. Just that Tropical Freeze is a great game. I'm glad it was put on Switch. So more people could enjoy it. I'm glad it got the sort of reevaluation it deserved. And I hope that Donkey Kong Country Returns could get an HD port. That'd be great. I know I talked about it before, but yeah, if you wanted to hold over Donkey Kong fans a little bit more, and if the theme park is including returns elements, I feel like that's sort of a no-brainer. I may even predict that would happen someday. Maybe not on this console, but maybe on the next console. I don't know. Anyway, great to talk to you. Great to have the show back. I'm very happy that you got your YouTube channel finally up and going. I've heard for a while about you getting demonetized or rather the opposite. You weren't getting money, so I'm glad you're getting money because you deserve it. Okay, love you both. Take care and goodbye.
Well, thank you for the calls, Traveler of the Stars. And that was a masterful segue, bringing us from Luigi with the Big Sausage to Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze.
Yeah.
Well done. You are a natural at this, almost as good as we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd argue even better in some cases.
You hit upon a lot of points that we're going to be addressing in our final thoughts for the legacy of Tropical Freeze and where the Donkey Kong series is in the present day. But I will say that I agree that Returns should have a similar treatment. I think that a good like bridge between now and the new Donkey Kong game. If the new Donkey Kong game is still like a year or more out, bring us Donkey Kong Country Returns on the Switch as kind of like the end of Switch thing. Get them both on the Switch. Allow people to play it readily again, especially because it will factor into so much of the theme park. I completely agree. I'm kind of astounded they haven't done it, but I know Retro's kind of been busy. They kind of been in purgatory for, 10 years now, almost.
Yeah.
Like that's the funny thing too. We talk all about, Donkey Kong hasn't had a new standalone game in 10 years. I'm like, Retro Studios hasn't either.
They feel that pain.
Yeah, like all of Retro got out in the time since Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze again.
And the Metroid Prime remaster,
oh,
partially.
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry, I don't pay attention to Metroid because I'm always like, should have been Donkey Kong.
That's okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. I understand.
I don't have an issue with Metroid. Can I just clarify that? I know, like.
Oh no, yeah.
I know back 10 years ago it was almost tongue in cheek, but then the tongue got a little bit too far into the cheek, where it'd be like, take this, Metroid. We're gonna suck it to ya. Rah Donkey Kong. But that was more just reactionary. I actually do like Metroid. It's not like my cup of tea, but I don't begrudge anyone who prefers sipping from it.
There's nothing wrong with those tea leaves.
All right, the next caller is also a back-to-back 5-minute affair or so. So let's go ahead and play both of those back-to-back and address what they have to say.
Okie doke.
Okie dokie.
Hello, it's me, Captain Ratley. So, 10 years since Tropical Freeze. Man, what a time, huh? And all people are being a little cynical, and honestly, I really can't blame them. 10 years, and all we really have to show for it are a couple of Legos that are being discontinued, a theme park from across the other world, and maybe one in the next year, and like some movie stuff where Donkey Kong is basically turned into Mario's lackey. He's given fire powers and everything. Like, it's not really like a jungle world anymore. It's more just like, it's just another world in Mario's verse. It's not separate at all. But like, yeah, I get that, like, you've all said that, like, this is the building phase. We're gonna get to the big boys soon. And I just have to ask, like, aside from, like, the multimedia stuff that's just new in general, is the way Donkey Kong's been treated right now any different from how he's been treated for the last 20 years since the buyout? Like, I'm serious. Has it really been any that different? Like, basically, like, Funky and Dixie have only been in, like, playable in, like, 2 to 3 games in the last 10 years. And then you got, like, but everything else, DK and Diddy are all in the Mario stuff and everything, and, like, apparently they're, like, gonna be, like, the main focus of the theme park, with Dixie and Cranky being, like, cameos at the park. Like, all the merch, all the everything, all the appearances, all the, like, relevance, it's really just the same 2 characters we've been getting for the last 10 years. Like, we've only just recently just starting to get some kind of love for Dixie and Funky or Cranky and all of them. But, like, at the same time, like, it just doesn't really feel like we're actually getting close to a new era. Because even if we are, it's like, it feels like they're just treating Donkey Kong as, like, a part of Mario's world, just something that is just not really its own separate brand that's going to get its own spin-offs, just a Luigi's Mansion or Yoshi's Island type deal. You know what I mean? Like, and all I really have to say about all of it is, like, I don't know, like, it's kind of disappointing. But, like, it's just, I don't know. Hey, Captain Riley again. I think I got cut off a little bit, but, like, as I was saying, like, it feels a little unfortunate that, like, if your rumors are true, that, like, Nintendo was putting the faith of the Donkey Kong brand in Activision of all studios. You know, the whole breast milk company, you know, those sleeveballs, those were our future endeavors for Donkey Kong until, like, they just abandoned it. Like, I feel like that's a sign that, like, man, Nintendo has not been treating the brand right. Even now, like, they've just been doing the same things they've always been doing for the last 20 years since the buyout. Theme park and movies aside, which was already unprecedented at the time anyway, because, like, most video games do not get theme parks at all. We don't have a Sonic theme park. We don't have a Halo theme park. Like, Mario's the first video game park, like, I think ever in the history of the universe. So, like, it really doesn't feel like I just have to say that, I don't think Donkey Kong would have gotten his own theme park if he wasn't already attached to Mario, especially considering that there are rumors from the theme park stop, the ones that have been scarily accurate with the Donkey Kong stuff, that Epic Universe is going to get a Luigi's Mansion park right next door to the Donkey Kong and Mario theme park. Which just hammers home to me that, like, they're treating Donkey Kong not really as, like, its own separate thing that's going to get its own separate spin-offs, but rather just another Mario spin-off. One that you'll get one game every generation, and that'll be it. Until the next one. Like, maybe that'll be fine with y'all, but, like, I don't know. It really doesn't feel like we're entering a new era, especially with, like, how they're still giving preferential treatment to Diddy and DK and not really anybody else. Anyways, that's really all I'll have to say for now. I'll end it now.
Thank you for the calls, Captain Radley. Malik.
Yeah?
Yeah. Would you like to address any of this? Because I feel like anything I say won't be adequate, unfortunately.
Okay, so I don't have the same. I'm not worried about all of this, honestly. I'm kind of opposite in how this is more than like the call said. This is more stuff than we have gotten in the last 20 years or so. Like, I never thought Donkey Kong would be in a movie and all this other stuff, and I'm actually pretty happy and positive of how things have been going the last few years or so. So I wouldn't say it's like cause for alarm or anything, and yeah, I'm not worried or sad or nothing.
Yeah,
I don't think anyone should be.
I'm not going to begrudge anyone for feeling that way, because I understand, and, you know, once upon a time, I felt many similar emotions when it came to the direction of Donkey Kong or the future stuff that I like not going in the direction I like it to be. But, you know, for all I feel like I can really address that I haven't addressed or I'm not going to address as we wind this episode down is that, yeah, Mario and Donkey Kong are connected. They are linked. They have a shared heritage by way of Donkey Kong Arcade and a continued heritage through things like Mario Kart. They're always going to be sister series, effectively. And that carries with it both good and bad things. One good thing, though, is that it does provide a constant window or doorway for Mario fans to get into Donkey Kong games. And I can understand the Super Mario Brothers movie may have weirded some folk out when it comes to creating this impression that Donkey Kong is just a Mario supporting character and not the star of his own franchise. And then if Donkey and Diddy are just supporting characters, where does that leave the rest of the cast? But I also think that it's ignoring that Nintendo is taking great strides in keeping them separate where it counts. If that makes any sense. Yes, the theme park is right next.
I think so.
The theme park is right next to the Mario section of Super Nintendo World, but they are still separate lands. You're not having Mario stuff in the Donkey Kong side of things. And, you know, in the last 6 years or so, you know, Donkey Kong became its own independent brand under Nintendo, and you're seeing that in some of the merchandise that's come out since then. Like recently, the Jakks Pacific Donkey Kong toys that they've either re-released from the era of Tropical Freeze or have done new sculpts for. You know, it's got its own packaging. It's not part of the Super Mario line, which replaced the World of Nintendo series. You know, we've got Donkey Kong packaging that makes no mention of Mario. So it's just hard to kind of accept that on faith if we don't have a new game. And I do get that. And where I can say, you know, I am kind of plugged in. I've got my sources. I've seen and heard things. And that's great for me. But as I'm communicating to the rest of you, you have to take that at face value from me. It's a matter of trust. And if you can't see anything tangible, then it's hard for you to have that sense of security that I have. So I do understand, and I don't begrudge you for feeling that way. And there's probably nothing I can say right now to quell your fears that I haven't already said, right? That isn't just taking me at my word and face value, because I realize that only goes so far while we still don't have the new game. So, that being said, I wouldn't worry about Dixie. Dixie's here to stay. You say, well, they're just cameos in a theme park. I mean, they're in the theme park. The fact that we have a theme park, like, there hasn't been a theme park aside from Mario, aside from, you know, what is already there at Super Nintendo World. And, I don't know. I don't know how else to put a rose on that. Because it's a huge deal. I think it's just hard to conceptualize because it's in Osaka. It will be opening in Osaka later this spring. It will be coming to Orlando in 2025. Like it's already confirmed. So it's just, it feels kind of remote and not really clear yet. I think once the land is open in Japan and we see videos of it, we get a video of Miyamoto walking around and touring it, it will start to hit home a little bit that the future of Donkey Kong is secure.
I can't wait for that direct, honestly, because you know it's coming.
It better be. Like, if I don't get my little video of Miyamoto interacting with the animatronic Rambi, and, you know, then I'm going to be like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Nintendo? Yeah. But no, there is a lot of good, promising stuff ahead this year. And I'll reiterate the reasons why it's been a decade-long wait that you already know quite well, Captain Radley, but I'm not worried. And all I can say is life is too short to worry about such things. This is entertainment. This is a way to make the darkness in our world feel a little bit lighter. You can't stress out about it. It's really not worth it.
Yeah.
I say this as somebody who does this as my full-time job. This is my career, talking about Donkey Kong and such. And I'm just like, it's not worth it. When it stresses you out, do something else that brings you joy. Come back to Donkey Kong when the situation is more amenable, when it's more of a joy and less of a stress. It's okay to walk away for a bit and take a deep breath and find something in this wonderful world that brings you a smile.
Well put.
Yeah. Okay. We got 2 more calls, but they're single calls. So we're gonna play the first one. We're gonna hear what they have to say. We're gonna respond to it, and then we're gonna repeat.
Okay.
Hey, the Kongversation's back. Oh, I've been waiting for this. You guys didn't start making videos in February. I got scared. I thought something happened to you. Gabe here. So man, we're doing an episode on tropical freeze and just how long it's been. You know how long it's been? I'll tell you how long it's been. The entire Splatoon franchise was born and then became one of Nintendo's A-listers in the time since the last Donkey Kong game. Pokemon Z, which was canceled 10 years ago in like 2015, is now real again and coming out. And I know you don't know what Pokemon Z is. Just think about Donkey Kong Racing and how cool that would have been. That's what Pokemon Z was for us Pokemon fans. I went through puberty. I was a little baby child when Tropical Freeze came out, and now I'm a man. It's been so long since Tropical Freeze, you know, and it's not like Donkey Kong has just been gone. He's always invited to every kart race, every party. There was the movie, there was the Rabbids DLC, there was, of course, the Tropical Freeze port a couple of years back, and that theme park is coming out, right? It's not like the Donkey Kong's just been gone forever, but it has been quite a while since that new game. And you know, whenever a new game is announced for other franchises like Kirby or even something like Metroid, they get like the red carpet treatment for a couple months, right? Like they get these new trailers and everyone's talking about it. There's like memes and stuff and it really feels special, right? You might even get like a specific direct. Could you imagine a Donkey Kong direct? Wouldn't that be something, right? It's just, I really would like Donkey Kong to have that moment that so many of my other favorite franchises get, you know? It feels like Donkey Kong is just being neglected, and I know that's not the case. It can't be. It could be worse. We could be like the poor mother fans whose game is stuck in Japan for all eternity. But, you know, 10 years. 10 years, you guys. 2014. It's been 10 years. Crazy. All right, catch you guys later.
Well, that's a great way of putting it, Gabe. We're not Earthbound fans. We're not F-Zero fans. Yep. I don't like to do that because again, that feels ugly. Like I'm deriving pleasure from their pain, which I'm not. I want every Nintendo fandom to have their due. I don't want there to be any long hiatuses, but it could be a lot worse. It really could be. We are making out pretty well considering the circumstances. And all of this is rooted in a point, Malik, you brought up on your Jungle Beat video, which was a point I brought up, but you reiterated there. Donkey Kong didn't have a home after Rare, and he couch surfed for the better part of 8 years. And
yeah, I stole that from you.
Yeah, I know. I appreciated the shout out. Thank you. But retro was never going to be a permanent solution, given the speed in which they make games, given that they can only make one game at a time. It was never going to be the long-term home for Donkey Kong. It was a way station. It was a place to park the franchise for a couple years until they figured out what to do next. And the fact that they were able to put their stamp on it so much, though, and create such an outsized legacy for it, that the theme park is going to be themed around it, that presumably this will be the iconography of Donkey Kong going forward. I don't want to sell them short like, oh, well, retro was just a stopgap. It definitely wasn't a stopgap, but it was never going to be Donkey Kong's permanent home. And then we hit that point where retro was ready to move on. And what do you do with Donkey Kong? Well, that's kind of where we're at right now, but it's not been for lack of wants on Nintendo's part. And they clearly show they have the ambition and drive to get behind Donkey Kong. It's just been a really bad hand dealt to us. And by us, I mean the Donkey Kong fandom and enthusiasts, you know, it is what it is. That's life. But yeah, I'm really glad I'm not an Earthbound fanatic.
I was going to say real quick, like, I know we always compare Donkey Kong to Batman, or at least I do, but I also compare Donkey Kong to, like, Superman.
Oh, yeah?
I'm saying this as someone who really isn't deep into Superman stuff, but I feel like Superman gets a lot of, like, he doesn't get as much attention as Batman, but he's always there, and people know who he is, and you know that something is always cooking with him.
Yeah.
It might just take a little bit to come out. And they are also both jack dudes with initials that are in red and yellow, so that's kind of cool too.
And I don't know if you know this, Malik, but the DK insignia, it actually means hope in his language.
I believe it.
So yeah, that's actually a really spot on analogy, because we do compare Donkey Kong to Batman and Mario to Superman, because you got the more like straight laced, noble, can do no wrong hero wearing red and blue, and then you've got the frenemy with the dark side, you know. And so we're like, oh, yeah. Mario's Superman, Donkey Kong's Batman. But in this analogy, really in popular conception, Donkey Kong is Superman, where it feels like sometimes he's the also-ran, where he came first technically, but but Batman, and in this case Mario,
gets cartoons all the time.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say Batman gets cartoons all the time. Superman got a new cartoon for the first time since Superman the Animated Series back in the 90s. Well, it took like 20-something years for him to get something.
Wasn't Superboy in that Legion of Superheroes cartoon?
Yeah, but that wasn't a Superman cartoon, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
That was like
like Superman is like, always in Batman's shadow, when it should be vice versa, given the importance that the characters had on comic books and like popular media in the early to mid 20th century. But I love both Superman and Batman, and I love Donkey Kong, and I sometimes tolerate Mario. So, you know, you're right though. That's actually a perfect way of putting it. Superman fans never really have to be worried about Superman. Just like I feel like Donkey Kong fans never have to be worried about Donkey Kong. Like I get the anguish of Banjo-Kazooie fans, because that's in my wheelhouse. That's in my bubble. You know, Banjo-Kazooie, like the sister series of Donkey Kong on the rare side of the family. And I really get that, because there is all this like uncertainty with Banjo-Kazooie. But with Donkey Kong, I have this assurance they're always going to be doing something with Donkey Kong. Always.
Yeah, he's going to be all right.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we have one more call, and let's play it. And then let's wrap it up before we hit the 20th anniversary of Tropical Freeze.
All right.
Hi, this is Chronax calling in for the 10th anniversary of Tropical Freeze episode. A very special time, I think we can all agree. And basically, I'd just like to call to sort of offer, I think, kind of a unique perspective within the DK Violent fan community, which is that I grew up with this game. This is my childhood Donkey Kong Country game. I remember very vividly being disappointed that it got delayed, and I must have been like 9 or 10 years old at that time. So that means that I was able to get into Donkey Kong properly, and Be Roared was just like a fantastic game of like my entry point to Donkey Kong, although all the country games are very good, so I guess that's not saying much. And then having to spend the entire rest of my life, like half of my life now, just going into college, waiting for that next game. Which I know we've talked a lot, been a big topic on the show about how things feel like a much longer wait when you're a kid, and how like the waiting has gotten easier, it's just become less of a portion of your life. So I've had to bear the brunt of that. But you know, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that Donkey Kong acts as my entry point into the wider DKU. Weirdly, I've always been kind of passionate about Rare, even not being in the context where I like grew up with the games. I assume it was just like some YouTube recommendation rabbit hole like a decade or so ago that got me to watch like old reviews of Banjo-Kazooie or what have you. But I'm glad whatever weird circuitous path got me here, and I'm glad that I got to be a fan starting with such a great game. That hopefully we can get another game before I'm a bitter 30-year-old like respectfully so much of the DK Vine fan base. Thank you so much.
Oh.
Bitter.
I don't think he was talking about us, Malik. I don't think that was in reference, because we're not bitter, are we?
No, we're not bitter.
Nah,
I'm the opposite.
We're genuinely upbeat, fellas.
Yeah.
No, that was an awesome perspective. Thank you so much for calling. I saw the call came in like within the hour before you start to record, and I'm glad you got it in, because we talk about returns babies sometimes, the kids who got into returns. I don't know if I've ever heard of from a Tropical Freeze baby. The assumption is like you would have played returns first and then gotten into Tropical Freeze, but Tropical Freeze is your entry point. Can I just say, well done, like getting the hang of that.
Mm-hmm. You want to talk about current babies?
Yeah, well, but I mean, just being able to navigate such a difficult game and walking away a huge fan of the series. Hats off to you. That I don't know if that would have been me if circumstances were different. So yeah, I'm also sorry. I'm very apologetic that you had to spend your childhood effectively waiting for the next Donkey Kong game, because yeah, like it's fortunate for me being an adult, and the wait doesn't seem as long because I'm hurtling towards the grave. But when I was your age, back when Tropical Freeze came out, Donkey Kong Country, the original, came out, and I got a sequel a year later. Hell, I got a Game Boy midquel between that. And I had annual games. I had Diddy Kong Racing. I had spin-offs, Banjo-Kazooie and Conquer and Dinosaur Planet / Star Fox Adventures. And, like, there was never that long, miserable wait until I got to the point where the passage of time is really a blink of an eye. So, I'm just going to give you a round of applause for having to do it. You deserve.
Yeah, me too.
You deserve your flowers. You deserve to have the best Donkey Kong game ever on any platform when it comes out next, because you have earned it, my friend. Thank you for listening. Thank you for finding DK Vine and the DKU by extension, and it's great to have you. I try not to frame everything from the perspective of my broken 40-year-old ass, but it's hard to do when, providing context for my own life experiences. So it was really great to hear from somebody half my age who got into Tropical Freeze at the time I got into the original Donkey Kong Country. Like, it's a really cool perspective to have.
Yeah, super cool.
Super cool, like the Snowmads.
Yeah, no pun. We're making a lot of puns today.
You kind of have to with a game called Tropical Freeze. Speaking of the Snowmads, as we start to wrap this up, I do want to give a quick plug. The Kiwi Talks podcast has done a lot of interviews with people from Retro Studios, and they did something for the 10th anniversary of Tropical Freeze, where it was discovered, and clickbait sites kind of blew this out of proportion from what it initially was, which is when they were first talking about doing the sequel, they started talking about ideas, what they could do for a follow-up. And one of the ideas they had, which was, what if Donkey Kong's Moon Punch at the end of Returns, the much controversial Moon Punch, what if that was actually the setup for the plot of the game? What if he disrupted a civilization of moon-based extraterrestrials, and that caused this alien incursion onto Donkey Kong Island? And I think that's a really cool idea, but I think the Snowmads were ultimately the right call, personally speaking.
They were cooler.
Well, space aliens, extraterrestrials, I think they can work in the Donkey Kong series. We saw Whizpig in Diddy Kong Racing, although Diddy Kong Racing is a bit atypical in tone and presentation. It's a Diddy Kong game. Xananav and Planet Plantain and Jungle Climber. I would say Xananav is a beloved Donkey Kong character among the hardcore faithful. But I think the direction they went for with Tropical Freeze, it was able to maintain the tone and aesthetics of the series in a way that, taking it into a more sci-fi oriented path may have betrayed a little bit. Like, had we gotten maybe a third retro Donkey Kong Country game in, say, 2016, then maybe, yeah, do something wildly different. But seeing as how it was the last new standalone game for at least a decade, I think having something more tonally true to Donkey Kong is preferred by me.
Yeah, same here. Like, when I heard that whole story about him punching the moon and aliens coming out, that sounds like something I would come up with. And I think it's pretty awesome that did cross their minds. Like, dude, what if there were aliens on the moon?
Yeah.
But... Or as the Donkey Kong Country cartoon called it, Maniac Monkeys on the Moon. But, you know, I think the Snowmads were the better idea.
Well, it's a good thing I've made my peace with the cartoon for the most part, because otherwise...
Yes, that's the only reason I brought it up.
You know, Retro was toying around with revisiting the moon idea even into the concept art stage. Like, they thought, what if, like, the secret world after Donkey Kong Island was the moon? What if Donkey Kong actually goes back to the moon? Like, I do like revisiting like the cause and effect of, oh, you defeated the Tiki Tak tribe with this absurd thing, this moon punch, but what could transpire from that, like butterfly effect?
Yeah,
because yeah, like that could have been cool, but I do like the Snowmads. I do like what they did with Tropical Freeze, and I feel like overall, it served the mythos of Donkey Kong Country a lot better than here's extraterrestrials from the moon. Like, again, if we were getting more games more frequently, then sure, experiment all you want. It's like the people who say K-Rool should be a cowboy and there should be a Wild West theme to Donkey Kong Country, and I'm like,
no. Not yet.
Not yet. Like, again, if we were getting consistent releases, sure, you can try all sorts of kooky things, but you've kind of have to keep it, I think, spiritually true to the core conceits of Donkey Kong Country before you can really get weird with it. Like, I don't think the Brothers Bear would have worked until we got to the third Donkey Kong Country game in the space of 2 years.
Yeah. I feel the same way. It's like, no bears on Donkey Kong Island on the first game. It's like, no, I can't accept that yet.
Yeah. And looking at Tropical Freeze's legacy, as we wrap things up here, Malik, Tropical Freeze brought Dixie Kong back to prominence. I know, Captain Radley has a lot of concern about Dixie and her future, but Dixie would probably not be where she is as a permanent part of the Donkey Kong cast, as seen in the new theme park. Like, it's a cameo, but she's still in all of the marketing for it. She's still right there with Cranky and Rambi and Squawks. And I don't think she would have been there had Tropical Freeze not reestablished her importance to the series. And I don't have any concerns about Dixie. Do I think, will Dixie be playable in the new game? I don't know. Maybe not. Do I think Dixie will be playable in games after that? Yeah, I do. I think Dixie will always be around, and any fear we have for any of these characters is just spurred by the lack of new games for the last decade. But I think Tropical Freeze got her over the line. Tropical Freeze cemented her as a vital part of the cast.
I can't add anything to that.
And I would argue it's what pushed Funky over the line as well. Like, when you look at Funky Kong, it was Mario Kart Wii's weird decision to include Funky Kong that turned him into a household name. Like, I think it's inarguable. Like, that's what made Funky Kong Funky Kong in the minds of the general populace. But
the normies.
Tropical Freeze then plugged that back into the Donkey Kong series proper. And then that was made all the more official with new Funky mode. And I think Funky is just... It's weird because he's a character who should not work. He's a character who should be viewed as a relic of when Donkey Kong Country came out, but he's not. People love Funky Kong. Unironically adore Funky Kong. Funky Kong was on Saturday Night Live last year. Like, what the hell? and
I know, right?
Tropical Freeze was an important building block in making Funky sort of the icon, this giant of video games that he's implausibly become. And that's, yeah. So Tropical Freeze really has made an impact. We talk about how the theme park is based around returns, but Tropical Freeze, we can't discount what it also did for the series. And by bringing back David Wise, it helped create more of a bridge between the Rare era of Donkey Kong and the current era. I feel like they're now more tonally and spiritually whole than they were when Returns came out. There isn't this harsh dividing line. It's, oh, well, David Wise, this veteran from Rare who established or helped establish the sound of the series with Evelyn Novakovic, he came back and he provided the soundtrack for a new generation of Donkey Kong. And I don't know, it's just really cool to have that link, to have that little bit of Rare pedigree in Tropical Freeze. Not that you need to have Rare veterans to make a good Donkey Kong game that feels part of the greater whole, but it just grants it that little bit of audible legitimacy. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And as I said in our calls, it is okay to be bummed out. I am not going to say you are wrong for having the emotions you are having, because I know I keep a veneer of positivity slathered over my, despite being 40 years old, tight and taut body. But I too occasionally succumb to the blues, and I don't mean the bear. I would happily succumb to that bear, but the future of the series will always feel like a question mark until we get the new game. I understand that, and I recognize it. And honestly, there should have never been a decade without a new game. That is ridiculous. That is redonkulous, even. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances that befell us. But as I do argue, the void was never intentional. It was never done with malice. It's a wild set of circumstances. And I know I've addressed all of this before, so I will be quick. 1. Well, 0. The buyout. The Rare buyout. You want to lay it at somebody's feet, it's Nintendo not buying Rare in 2001. Okay. 2. Or it's actually 1. That was 0. This is 1. 1. Retro was ready to move on to try something new. I do not begrudge them. They should not be shackled to Donkey Kong or chained to Kong any more than they should Metroid. Retro had every right and had earned the right to do something new. I feel bad that I had to go back to Metroid Prime 4 in all honesty, but that being said, it was just always going to be the way it was going to be. I would have loved to have seen a third Donkey Kong Country game. I do understand why they didn't go that route. 2, Nintendo did quickly make plans for a new Donkey Kong game by taking it to another studio, which we have reported on the past to be Vicarious Visions. That was ultimately scuppered for numerous reasons, after Nintendo had already tied up their resources for the foreseeable future, leaving no immediate place for Donkey Kong. 3, the pandemic then ground everything to a halt even more. So, yeah, you can look at release dates and a lack of new game spines on your shelf that say Donkey Kong on them and feel like the series is on death's door. But I just feel like that's superficial. That's a limited way of looking at things. Because what other series can say, okay, their game that sort of flopped on the one console had a renaissance on the next, finally getting that warm reception across the board and being regarded as a modern classic and one of the best 2D platformers ever made. Not many series have that comeback after a game more or less flops by metrics.
Yeah.
Then, Nintendo did not leave Donkey Kong completely high and dry. Remember, they did, along with Ubisoft Milan, give us Donkey Kong Adventure and Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, which I know. That's also why I keep stressing the terminology that we haven't had a new standalone Donkey Kong game in a decade, because it's an important caveat, because I don't want to dismiss that out of hand. And I know there was also his appearance in Skylanders Superchargers, which, yeah, it's Skylanders. I know. But it was a genuine early attempt at a stopgap when they knew Retro wouldn't be doing a third game. I mean, they don't do this for every series under the sun, like, oh, there's not going to be a new Donkey Kong game for a while. We need to come up with something to kind of bridge that divide. They do care about Donkey Kong. 3. In a decade since Tropical Freeze, we have gotten King K. Rool back into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which is an enormous victory that I see many fans starting to undersell these days. Like, do you remember? Do you remember how absurd that felt to see King K. Rool in that trailer? Like,
do you remember how your heart almost came out of your chest?
There's this notion that that's somehow discounted because Nintendo is not mentioning K. Rool or using him. But my question is, use him where? In what capacity are they supposed to be using him? Like in Mario Kart? Like I don't understand what we want them to be doing with K. Rool while there's nothing new to promote for K. Rool.
Yeah.
It
don't make sense.
Yeah. Like, the fact that King K. Rool was revived at all, thanks to fan demand, that's basically unheard of when it comes to Nintendo.
Yeah.
And
like Sonic does it all the time. No, not Nintendo.
Not Nintendo, no. And this is more big picture and more insular to DK Vine's way of thinking. But the connection between Donkey Kong Country and Banjo-Kazooie was also reestablished with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which, again, is something I never thought I would see again.
Mm-hmm.
To have
it's a big deal.
To have Banjo and Kazooie interacting with Donkey, Diddy, and K. Rool in that trailer, like, what the hell? What the hell?
Am I dreaming?
And love it or hate it, the Super Mario Bros. Movie did do a lot last year for reestablishing enthusiasm for the Donkey Kong cast among the youth set. Yes, it was carried through in the Trojan horse of the Mario franchise, but you know what? I will take it. Because people, and I saw this through our own metrics last year, more people were searching for Donkey Kong than they had been searching for Donkey Kong since DK Vine was founded. Okay? So
I can attest to this.
it's going to be a huge springboard for when the new game comes out. There's going to be a ripe and ready market, ready to consume it in a way that I don't think was there for when Tropical Freeze was announced. And, you know, I posited this on the episode earlier, and in our live stream, Carlton the Robot asked, like, aren't you terrified people will reject the next DK game if it's not a Mario team-up or a big 3D adventure after 10 years without a DK game? You know, there's always going to be critiques. There's always going to be people who are upset because it's not exactly what they wanted. But I think the general reception will probably be warmer because people are ready for a Donkey Kong game. And it's not going to be a Mario team-up. I feel like I'm fairly confident they wouldn't go in that route, given the lengths they've gone to keep them separate aside from the Mario movie. But look, I think there's more of a built-in fandom now for Donkey Kong than there has been in over 20 years. And finally, yes, the theme park. And I know the theme park is just something I harp upon, and it's lost all meaning in these arguments, but a theme park in both Japan and the United States is a big, big, big deal, people. It's huge. The fact that this isn't Hyrule Land or Kirby's Dream Land or
Earthbound Land.
Or like some yet another Pokemon area park. The fact that they're doing Donkey Kong and it's a faithful recreation of the games is enormous. Because here's the thing about Nintendo. Like, they don't like to promote stuff they have no intention of having a future for. They don't do it. They don't do. Everybody was upset when Nintendo didn't acknowledge Donkey Kong's 40th anniversary because they didn't have anything ready to go to tie into the 40th anniversary. They're not going to be investing all this capital in a theme park if they have no intention of ever making a new Donkey Kong game again. The purpose of the theme park from Nintendo's mind is to get people into Nintendo. So they're going to go into a Donkey Kong Country theme park. They're going to want to play Donkey Kong games. And I don't think the back catalog is going to suffice in Nintendo's mind. They're going to want to have new product on store shelves. If we reach the 20th anniversary of Tropical Freeze and we still haven't had the new game, okay, I'll eat some crow, which you know I'm loath to do, and I will admit I was wrong. But I really do believe it won't be much longer now until Kotaku can start complaining about the presence of another damn Donkey Kong game.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.